welcome. You're watching this. We recorded this early, but hopefully this is the weekend of Scorsese's new movie, and I picked. I guess, yeah, I would consider us all big fans of Scorsese. Bar gets roped in with Kirk as their team partners in trivia and talks about Scorsese. He's more of a Hepburn person, but all Scorsese. We kind of picked movies from each decade, but we're going to go in different order. But yeah, it should be a lot of fun. Pretty pumped about his new movie. I have no idea what it's about, truly, because I'm staying away from everything. Just trying to stay strong and go in blind. But I have Tim here. Tim, my fellow Scorsese brother. I think this is one of the first things we ever bonded over. Basically, as I introduce everybody, just like even if it's a movie we're talking about, your first Scorsese, like your thoughts, and then we can go deep into the movies later. But Tim, what was your first Scorsese that you remember?
I think the first one was honestly probably Wolf of Wall Street then, but I saw it in the theater and I was like, oh, cinema. And then I actually didn't watch any more of him until like a couple years later. I saw The Departed and then I went through everything. So I might have seen like Hugo, or I might have seen Gangs of New York, but I don't really the first time I remember being like, this is Martin Scorsese. It was definitely Wolf of Wall Street, I think.
We got Kaleb Boatman. Kaleb Boatman, what was the first Scorsese for you?
I'm a youngling, so my first Scorsese was Hugo, because that was I was 11 when it came out, and it was accessible, and I watched it. And I remember thinking, this is kind of weird, but I think I liked it, ?
Great movie.
And then, that my first real Scorsese was the king of comedy. That was my not that Hugo isn't real Scorsese, but
that was your first go back and watch.
Comedy was my introduction to Scorsese outside of Hugo, because it was PG, so I could watch it.
That's fair.
Yeah. 80s is a weird time. Everything was PG. Bar Scorsese.
Hello.
What was it for you?
It was either The Wolf of Wall Street or it was Gangs of New York, and I just can't remember which one came first for me.
Two very different times.
I just always think about that time frame because the 13th, Leo's in it. We're not talking Wolf of Wall Street tonight. I just think it's very interesting. If that's your first one, holy shit, that's like a waterboard experience for Scorsese. You're going in and there's just excess on top of 3 hours of Leo on drugs. It'd be a great time, but it's a wild if it's your very first one.
I'm not going.
I remember I'm leaving. Got really mad at my uncle for going to see Wolf of Wall Street.
Why?
Because my aunt was like, that's filthy. Why are you going to see it? It's filthy.
Oh, it's very filthy. And Kirk, how was Boxcar Bertha in the theater?
I wish.
Wouldn't that be highlight? What was your first Scorsese?
I think it was probably Goodfellas. I know my mom was a big influence on my movie taste, and she likes Scorsese. She would go all the stuff I saw first time was kind of either with her or in the universe, because she would be go to the video store and rent Apollo movies and watch them over the weekend. So I wouldn't necessarily be watching them, but I'd walk in and she'd be watching Goodfellas or something like that. So I think Goodfellas was the first one I remember having that experience of being in the room when it was on. And then when I got a little older, I think the movies me and my friends rented the most, would double feature a lot, was Goodfellas and Casino. Once that came out, were the ones we hit the most. So
Sexy.
Yeah, mine. I don't think I knew who was I don't think I knew directors for a long time growing up. That was never in my frame of reference of oh, this person directed, because I didn't give a shit. But I remember that opening to Goodfellas numerous times, seeing it at least on TV, because they showed it a lot growing up on TV, which I still think is sometimes wild. We'll get to that. Yeah. Sorry, answer the question. But no. My first one I think was The Departed. I think the first one was Departed. My grandma had a DVD and I played it. and it was one of the cool ones that I'd fall asleep with it on, and it would play twice, and then restart the movie. So there's numerous times I woke up to Queenan going off the building numerous times. So what a dramatic way to wake up. So so we did Scorsese. We're kind of doing a walk through some of his filmography. We kind of I broke it apart by eras just because I didn't want everybody to be pigeonholed to like picking, because I've talked to people in this community. I think his run from in the 21st century is like one of the greatest runs that anybody could possibly be on as a director. I don't think he's truly missed. This especially post 2006, like 2004. I think Gangs of New York is the one in between that people have questioned. Like, man, it's okay, it's not bad, but like he's hit everything since. So when around Barr took the 70s, Boatman picked the 80s. Kirk took the 90s, Tim took the 2000s, and I took the 2010s. The first movie we're going to go through is Mean Streets. Barr, you chose 70s, you chose Mean Streets. Why Mean Streets of all the ones from the 70s?
Well, mostly because I didn't think people here would like The Last Waltz. But
I also,
also because it's a Scorsese film that I had only seen one time before, and I didn't necessarily love it. So I kind of wanted to watch it again, kind of knowing what I was in for this time. And I also just love Harvey Keitel as an actor. I think that he's an actor who's kind of become underappreciated and undervalued. Like, he's still around and he still gets work, but not as much as he probably should. And this is kind of the movie that like really burst De Niro into the scene. Like, he had been around before, so I kind of wanted to view this more as like an acting tour de force film. And for me personally, I still kind of felt the same way as I did the first time.
Okay.
I think that you get the indications of what Scorsese is about to become, but it hasn't necessarily quite been flushed out yet. I think once people like Schrader and Schoonmaker came along, that's when like Scorsese, I think, they really finally found his complete voice as a director. But there are still a lot of things in this I like. I do like the acting. I think that the acting is really strong. I love the scene of the one guy getting shot in the bathroom. I think that the build up to that scene, like, there's a little bit of tension. Oh,
just why you picked it. We'll get into scenes. I don't want to deep.
Got it.
That's the classic Scott Harvey. He dives in and tells me the whole movie, and then we're sitting here like, hey, I wanted to talk about those scenes. Yeah. So Mean Streets, I'm curious what everybody else feels, because I feel like a few people, I've watched it only twice. This was my second watch fully through. I liked it a lot more than the second watch. I was different on that. I don't know how everybody else is. I hear a classic thing. It's called Mean Streets. It's not really that mean. Is a classic, like, I've read in a lot of reviews for it. Is like, I want mean, like, can it be a little bit more mean? Because it's very, I would say, dialogue-wise, a little bit more like ham and cheek, like, hey, I'm a gangster, yo, bada bing, bada boom, that stuff all the time. But I enjoyed it a lot. I like younger De Niro. I like Harvey Keitel, and that's something about Scorsese too. Like, Keitel was like Scorsese's like starting, like he used him, and then it fell off where he wasn't in a lot of. So I'm interested to see, how did everybody else think about Mean Streets? How many times did you guys see it before you watched it, and like how did it do this time? And then we'll get into scenes and moments.
This was like a pretty like late watch for me. I think I only watched it for the first time like last year. And I had seen most of Scorsese's other stuff. And I don't know why I had like put off watching it. It's just I had never like heard the other, like, I knew that like Goodfellas was a movie you had to get to. The Wolf of Wall Street was a movie you had to watch. Like, I never heard a passionate like love for Mean Streets from like anybody, and I kind of get it, but at the same time, I really like Mean Streets. I think it's kind of the cheese. Like, I think what I agree with a lot of what Bar said, though I feel like I like it more than he does. Because I agree, it's the default Scorsese. It's not like it's the cheese pizza of Scorsese, right? It's not. It doesn't have all the toppings on it. It doesn't have everything else, but it's like everything essential. The structure is there. Now let's see what he does with variations of it. Maybe that was an awful analogy.
The fact is, every time in this community, when you find it, you can find your way back to like comparing things to food, and I just find it very fast. Like it's the cheese pizza. Hey, cheese pizza's fucking good.
It's the
You know,
chocolate
maybe when you
chip
add
cookie.
when you add too many toppings,
chocolate chip cookie.
There's always
When
a
you
food
add
that
too
he had
many
just
toppings,
eaten.
messed up. Kirk, Tim, thoughts?
I really like this movie. I'd only seen it once before. This is the one out of all the movies we're going to talk tonight I've seen the least. But I actually thought of another Scorsese I saw before Wolf of Wall Street. I saw Shutter Island before Wolf of Wall Street. I saw that too when it came out. But I saw it. So when I first started, like, okay, Scorsese, I'm gonna watch his movies. I really like this director. It was after I had seen like most of the hits. Like I saw Wolf of Wall Street and loved it. A couple years later, saw The Departed, loved it. So then I watched Goodfellas. Then I watched Casino. Then I watched The Aviator. I rewatched Shutter Island. Like I went through a bunch of hits. Then I was like, okay, like I love this guy. I'm gonna go in order. Now I'm the type of guy where like, ooh, I'm gonna watch a director. I'm going to watch it in order. That's just what I always do. But back then I didn't. So I saw this in 2017. I looked on Letterboxd and I really liked it then. I gave it a 4-star then. And so like my opinion of it increased a little bit. We'll see if my score changes. Whoa. But I still really like it. It's one of the, it's weird. It's at like 1 hour and 52 minutes. It's at like one of the shorter Scorsese movies.
He just hit and went on from there. He doesn't stop.
Yeah, and I don't want to spoil. I thought very similarly to one of Kirk's reviews, so I'll be interested to see if he like says something about it. I'll raise my hand, but I really like De Niro in the movie. I agree with the sentiment of like, oh, it's early Scorsese, so it's not like as good as like when he's like really like going full crazy later on, but like I still think it's really great. And like this is what his fourth film, fifth maybe, so it's somewhere in the first 5 maybe. And I still think for like first 5 films it's better than most. Like I've been rewatching Spielberg, and like that dude like hits in like the first like few films. Scorsese hits in like the first few films, but then there's like other directors where it's like it takes a while sometimes for this guy to get good. So like, I mean, like even him on like a like still learning the ropes type of day is like way better than most. And I agree with Bar. Keitel is like way too good. And also
Skibbity scoppity boppity boopity.
It was
Meet the gangsters.
Joey
Like,
Clams.
I was watching it and Maggie sat down with my 8-week-old child and said, this doesn't have a fucking plot, and then walked away. So that's your macaw review right there. Yeah.
Kirk.
All right. First of all, I love the background picture because it makes me feel like we're all in a giant Martin Scorsese Megazord.
I have this one too.
Which is
if you like that one, I have that one too. So it's whatever you want on Steam.
That works. That's perfect. Just layer them.
I hope that's
And I'll just talk
in the middle of the Melee video that's shooting right now. Just like, all right, in the category of comedy.
But no, the first time I ever saw this was it was for a call. I was actually taking a Scorsese class in college, and this was the first movie they showed, and it was kind of sold as, all right, this is like the jumping off point, and we'll get through this. You know, this is like you're eating your vegetables, and then we'll get on to the good stuff after this. Which I think it was a disservice to the movie, and it was kind of a disservice to me because that's kind of how I thought about it for a while. I've probably seen it like 4 or 5 times now, and every time I've watched it, it's grown on me. And I do. It's not full blown Scorsese, but I do feel like there's a lot here. It's a lot more Scorsese than a lot of people give it credit for. I think, as far as like a lot of his ideas and the way he operates, the way he works, and the things he does. I think you're seeing a lot of that here. Not just like the seeds of it. I think a lot of it is developed even at this early stage. And yeah, just the cast. Keitel. I'm sure we'll get into that more later, but Keitel, De Niro. The supporting cast is great. And the soundtrack, you get the first really great Scorsese soundtrack, which I kind of put up to any of the other ones. But yeah, this is what I just appreciate more every time I watch it.
So I think it's basically where he pairs in with the 70s and like I believe if Scorsese could literally pick and choose like what era to do like all his movies set in, the 70s is just one of those eras, and I think it helps this movie a lot. Because it's set in a gritty time, like where, like I've said before on 70s movies, like it just feels real, like it's just like set, like almost like there's such, I don't know how it feels, comes off like a real thing. So with Keitel and De Niro in this movie, again, I enjoyed this movie more on a second watch than I did the first time. Because I think it's an unfair, kind of what Kirk said. I think it's unfair because when you pair it to older stuff, and you see older stuff before you see this, it is discount Scorsese to a T because it doesn't rise to the stuff that he's able to do in other stuff, in my opinion. Like, so that's always like that's why, but I went in with like a fresh like thing, and I think like that relationship, like the interaction between De Niro being like a young punk, like, thing in it would like worked really well for me in this movie, even when he meets his demise and everything. Like me again, love it.
I just noticed
yeah, he's over the back. So, we'll talk about like standouts in this movie or like standout moments. Does anybody have one that they want to like bring to the forefront? Go ahead.
I for me, like the image that will always come to mind, or the moment that will always come to mind when I think about this movie, is when De Niro comes in and he's talking a little bit and the jukebox starts playing Jumpin' Jack Flash and you get that slow-mo walk up. Like, to me, that is like the first true like Scorsese moment of his career where it just like feels like all the pieces are in place. And like, I want to talk about the soundtrack for a second. Because, like, I think it's important to note that, like, this is 1973. The movie soundtrack is, like, especially doing a movie soundtrack in this way, is still a relatively new thing. Like, sure, you have The Graduates and Harold and Maude, but those were all, like, both movies where one artist supplied all the songs. Like, this is one of the earliest examples I can think of where it's like a true like eclectic, just I am taking songs from different artists and putting them in my movie. Like I'm sure there are earlier examples, but this is one of the earliest populist examples I can think of.
Oh, right. But I think that's something interesting with Scorsese. Yeah. And again, I don't know his whole process. Like I haven't like, had lunch with him yet, but maybe in the works, but no, I'm just kidding. But when you sit there and like do the soundtrack and stuff, like he's gotta like have a factor in like deciding where that stuff goes in my eyes. I mean, go ahead.
I actually have like a little information on that. So we're going to just like skip ahead to Goodfellas for a little bit.
No.
Wait, no. It ties into it.
Well, just wait if it's anything Goodfellas related.
Well, I don't know if I can, if I'm going to explain how he worked.
Okay, then we'll pause and wait. But my thing is, regardless, I just don't want to jump because there's some great soundtrack stuff that we could talk about in Goodfellas that I would wait to talk about in Goodfellas. I don't know where you're going.
But it's not. I'm talking specifically about how he decides what to use when. Literally, like during the script, he's just like rambling, and he goes, "And then we played this song right here." And the scriptwriter was just like, "Okay, fine." Literally, he's like telling the screenwriter his idea of how the story goes, he literally just like, and now we're gonna use this song right here.
It's like to compare for the young kids out there, it's very James Gunn, where it's like in the script from the get-go. You put the songs in there. They know what they want.
No, then that's fair. Well, how you described it, like we're going to Goodfellas. You could have just said that, and I would be on board with you. And then you could.
Well, I'm saying that like, the writing of Goodfellas is how I know about this.
Well, how he reacts, that makes a lot of sense. Like where he would be like, I want this song at this moment. I want this here. Like make it work where I need it to go. But this is where I'm wanting, because he's very. It's not by accident. It's not by other people's design. You have to see somebody's like direction of where he's going in this film to play it. And this is like, I think what works really well with Scorsese, and you can see through his entire filmography of his needle drops and his music placement and everything, and what makes him such an interesting filmmaker for me, because it ties in, like, even when there's ones that I'm not like the biggest fan of, it's like the sound, if I'm not in love with this, but the soundtrack can drive me back into it, that's fantastic. I just don't think enough directors do that in a correct way. That, like, how many people, like, there's a misplay, there's something else, there's something wrong, like that song doesn't fit there. I don't think of a moment in Scorsese I'm like, that didn't work for me. That works perfectly. And I think you're right with the jumping jack flat. That stuff is like an exciting, like a great intro. He's so good with like introductions to characters and where they come in and what dialogue they start with. Like, he makes you either love, hate, or despise whatever characters instantly, if possible, like with what he's able to do with them. I think that's very smart.
No, I mean, it's almost like he uses the soundtrack as a lot of filmmakers will use a score to set the mood and set the tone, and he's perfect. I mean, that "Be My Baby" at the beginning with those, those home video clips of seeing that group, it just makes you like, it tells you so much about those characters and the world they're living in, and you just want to hang out with them and be a part of that. And it makes you, that song has so much to do with it, because that song just sets that mood so well. And then my other favorite scene is also in the bar, and I mean, I just want to talk about the whole bar in general, but the scene where I don't know what the technical term of it, but the scene where the camera's like, you tell he's like wearing the gear. It's like the camera's in his face. He's walking around the bar. It's that close up, and they're playing. I don't know the name of the song, but it's that real like kind of silly, like doo-up kind of song, but it just so perfectly like captures his mood and like his mind frame at that point in time. I think it's just so good. Like I said, it just captures the feel and the vibe and the thought process of the characters at that given moment.
Yeah, I'm a big fan. Like, my favorite, like, it's really early on too, but like the first time that like De Niro shows up in the bar and they're talking, and he's like, that whole sequence starting with him being like, Keitel being like, come outside, like, I want to talk to you or whatever. And he's like, oh, what are you doing? Like, I got these girls here. Da, 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 da. And like, he finally pulls him outside, and the way like it's Johnny Boy, right? That's his name. Like, the way that he just like slyly bullshits his way through the movie, but that scene in particular, I think, is like, because this is after Godfather Part 2, right?
No,
is it before? Is that 74? Okay, so it's
before.
Okay, so then perfect. My point stands. Is what I was gonna say was like, I feel like that just like from the get-go just like shows De Niro like really just absolutely like what we were gonna get with De Niro from like years and years forward of like how good he is, because he just like so convincingly just like bullshits his way. And then like the way he becomes just like so volatile throughout the movie. Like, I love the whole pool hall sequence when it turns into this like huge fucking fight just because he's such a cock. And then the cops come in, and it's like, oh, you get the dirty cop stuff, and then everything is like, seems like it's gonna be okay again, and then he just has to say the wrong thing just because he's a douche, and it's like, it's awesome. Like, I think he's so great in the movie.
Let's be honest, the fact that he survives for that long in the movie is wild to me.
It's that scene. Go ahead, sorry.
It's really interesting that he plays that role in this movie. The wild card, when he doesn't get that vibe in like any of the later Scorsese movies. He gets the Keitel role in the later movies, whereas in this he's getting, not to tip a thing, but he's basically getting the Pesci role. He's getting the wild card.
The closest thing he has that comes to it is like Cape Fear, is like where he's not playing like. Yeah, I think you're right, but
sure, like he's like villain
role in this. Like, that's a good comparison.
Yeah.
But like, not even to think how he's able to take the people that are traditional with a certain character and then flip them on their head and pass them to somebody else. It's crazy because in another movie, he flips a character that has never been that character for him and makes him the most understanding, most like boss-like that would have, if you look back, would have never been. We'll talk about that later. But I think it's with especially that scene where he's at the bar talking to the guy at the end. They're like having the argument, and I think it's a Patreon poster on Letterboxd, like him standing at the bar, like laughing at the guy, basically, and then where he meets his basic demise when they're driving that car with old Scorsese in the back. Those moments I love. Like,
I think that might be the banner picture on that
banner. That's what I mean
on this movie. Yeah. Like if you go and click on it, it's just him in the back there.
Yeah, so that's why, like, it's definitely that scene where he's talking to, well, you're too good for the $5. Like he's
that's
talking,
right.
Yeah, like you too good for it. Like you don't need it. Blah blah blah. And then he ends up getting, and I think it's really cool, and interesting shot, like where he's able to, in that drive where he's just trying to get him out of town, like to get him out of it, and they end up driving right up to him, and he gets shot in the neck, and that blood, and like how gruesome that entire scene looks. I think it's just like in '73 to make that look and like not look cheesy, like where it could look real bad. Because I think you look at some movies that could have been like that, and I think you get some inspirations from, because crime movies have been coming out, and you get that. But I think that's one of those scenes, like when he's talking to the guy and gets in the car and they end up hunting him down, and even where he like sets that up where they don't know anything's going on, but you see that car tailing them basically through the scene, and like it's there, but they're just not picking up on it. I think it's a very interesting shot. Anything on
just a comment on something Tim said, or I think it was Tim said, like, or how did Johnny Boy survive through this movie so long? Like, how did he make it? I think they do a great job setting up the fact that, like, these guys, like, this is, you have Keitel, and you have his uncle. His uncle's like the old school generation. They're like the bosses, and these guys are just like the neighborhood kids. Like, they're almost like playing at this, you could tell, like, they're always goofing around and playing grab ass and doing this stupid stuff. Like, they're not like there yet. They haven't arrived. And so, like, they're not like the all business professionals. These guys are just friends. And that's what I like about this, is that you see them, like, what's the name of the character he owes the money to? I forget his name.
Is it Tony? No.
I'm not sure, but
or Michael. I think it's Michael.
Yeah, whoever. Yeah, you see how, like, they're not afraid to, like, bust his balls and give him a hard time and, like, shove him around, like, even though he's kind of like would probably be considered the boss of their gang or whatever. So you see, they don't take this as seriously as the older generation seems to. So I think that's why he's able to push and get along, and why he feels he can get away with that for as long as he does. These guys, I don't think really have sensed. Like I said, they've been playing that. They really haven't got into, like, the real, like, professional aspects of it yet.
There's also, I would like to say, it's not her best performance that we see in a film that we're talking about tonight, but Martin Scorsese's mom appearing in a scene in this film.
Definitely not the best.
Definitely not the best scene that she appears in a film we'll be talking about tonight. But that was one of those things where, like, when I watched this movie, 7 years ago or 6 years ago, I had no fucking clue. And now tonight I was like, hey, this is the mama. And it was the same thing with, like, the next movie we're going to talk about, where Maggie was watching it with me, and she was like, is that Martin Scorsese? And I'm like, damn straight it is. So I love his cameos and having his family and stuff in the movie, because that's a big Scorsese thing. If you ever go and watch Criterion has a Scorsese Shorts Blu-ray, but I think you can find it on YouTube and stuff. There's a short that he directed called Italian American, where it's just him and like his parents'
Kirk was telling me
apartment.
about it, yeah.
It's fucking awesome. And so like everything with like his parents is just the best.
It's on HBO Max too, I think. At
Oh,
least it was.
perfect,
It still is.
perfect.
Or Max. Sorry.
Oh yeah.
Anything on Mean Streets before we move to the next movie?
Yeah, I think it would be, it's important to talk about like just the religious themes of this because it's so overwhelming. I think this is definitely his most religious movie. Just the fact that
silence.
silence.
Last
But I
Temptation?
think just as far as the
I forgot about silence. Like I love silence, but Last Temptation was the
Last
worst.
Temptation?
But I think, obviously that's overtly religious. But I think just as far as like,
Okay, you're saying like in a
Scorsese, in a traditional Scorsese movie.
Yes.
And I just think it's real interesting how that open. When I watch it this time, the opening line where he says, "You don't make up for your sins at church; you make for it at home, make up for it in the streets." I kind of took that as the thesis statement. So I was watching it as, okay, what are his sins and what is he making up for? And I think it's really interesting when you watch as he goes through this movie. Obviously, but when he says that, he says something to make up for his sins, and that's when you first see Johnny Boy. So it's like Johnny Boy is like his penance, like he's the person he has to that's his cross to bear. And he says he makes a comment of his, he has the saint medallion, and he says my favorite saint, Saint Francis of Assisi. So I did a little research on Saint Francis of Assisi, and they say that he was born wealthy. He was born to a wealthy family. And he was working for his father. I think it was a silk merchant or something. And a beggar came up to him and asked for money. And he gave all his money to his beggar and went off with the beggar and turned his entire family against him. So I think that's just a cool little thing, how that compares to Keitel's character in his life. And just a lot of the choices he makes, if you look at even the women he chooses, he's dating the epileptic girl who obviously his family looks down upon. He considers dating the black woman, even though he kind of bails the last minute. But it's he picks people who are going to bring hardship onto himself. He picks he makes the worst choices. I mean, not that those are bad people to be with, but in his world, those are going to cause the most problems for him. And he purposely self-destructs that way to, like I said, make it up for those sins he talked about.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I didn't put that two and two together, but I think that makes me like it more. Personally, across the board stuff. I know we've all seen them, so we all scored it. But if you have a score change, notify. I'm at 4 stars. I think I was 3.5 originally. I may be at 4 already, but that's where I think it stays. But Boatman, are you staying the same? Move up. Still 4. Bar, you're still at 3, correct?
Yeah, I'm still at 3. I think the script is just not quite there yet.
But you also treat your letterbox like 4.
It's a strong.
It dragged for me.
It's a strong.
It dragged.
Remember when you gave Godfather 4.5 stars because you fell asleep? That's okay. We'll never let you live to that. Never live it down. Kirk, where are you at now?
I was at 3.5. It's going up to 4 on this watch.
And I know my best friend. It's 4.
Yeah, it's still at 4. It's really good though. I liked it more the second time.
Yeah, it's great. Okay, so the next one is up to Boatman. We're at 80s for here. Why did you pick The King of Comedy? I've never heard you talk positively about this movie, so I was a little surprised.
I love The King of Comedy. It is my favorite Scorsese of the 80s, but that's not necessarily why I picked it.
No, sorry.
What?
Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, and that's not necessarily why I picked it, though. I think it's just it's one of his lesser talked about films, so I wanted to be able to break that down. And also, I just feel the 80s is such an odd decade for Scorsese, right? Because besides Raging Bull, which is the big one that everybody cares about, he made a lot of odd choices in the 80s. And I pretty much like every odd choice he made. But it's he did this, which is a comedy. It has dark undertones and things, but it is
comedy.
It's a comedy. And then he does After Hours, which is also a comedy. He does, it is. It's a dark comedy, but it's a comedy.
Sorry, I'm going to make facial expressions. Just press on. Go ahead.
He does The Color of Money, which is a sequel to The Hustler. And then he
Yeah.
does The Last Temptation of Christ, which now fits into his oeuvre a little bit better, but at the time was like nothing else he had ever done before. So like the 80s is just like a wild decade for him. But I think that like this one just has a lot to unpack. And I think all of his ones have something to unpack, but I've talked about After Hours before and logged it, so I didn't want to talk about that one again. I think this one just has a lot to unpack. And also I love it. I wanted to watch it again, so that's part of it.
Yeah, so I agree with you 100%. If I pick a decade of Scorsese, 80s is the most out there for him and doesn't make a whole lot of sense in the regard because he gets the rap like a lot of people do. That's the crime guy. That's the mob guy. That's the gangster movies. But really, he does gangster movies. Don't get me wrong, but like he has a lot in his filmography that is not just gangster movies. Like if you look at it, he has them, and most popular are gangster. But when he does it, this movie on rewatch, fucking hilarious. The fact that I know this is a classic like Koho Boatman thing. Like De Niro is fantastic. Like. And just his commitment to ignorance throughout this film is my favorite thing about it. Because he believes he is doing everything. What? It's also my favorite comedy line. I've quoted this to a few people this week, but my favorite quote in this entire movie is, I made some mistakes. Well, you know who else made mistakes? Hitler. Like when he drops that on him, Jerry Lewis is a treasure throughout this movie because Jerry Lewis is one of the funniest people in comedy, and to get him into this movie to do that older role, to do that like talk show host guy, and to pair him up with De Niro, where those two are like big personalities. Personally, they're massive personalities. But to play off each other so well, it works super well, and how like it's almost uncomfortable comedy the entire time because like. You feel for Jerry Lewis, like, get the fuck away from him. But, like, even when he's waiting for all the stuff and he's doing all the stuff, it's just weird because Scorsese can be funny. He has funny moments in his film, but to be this funny with this kind of stuff and how much he's influenced was crazy to me. I know we can go for things over jokes and quotes and stuff like that, but, like, freely just gush about it if you like. If you got a moment, you got a point, talk about it.
Yeah, I think the '80s are like kind of Scorsese's Coppola decade, where Coppola like made like some giant hits and then just did like a bunch of weird stuff for the rest of his career mostly. This is where like Scorsese kind of did the same thing, I think, to a lot more success. And but I agree with Boatman. Like I like most of those movies. I think he did a lot of interesting stuff there. But yeah, I love this movie. This might be, and I might say this a couple times today, but this might be my favorite De Niro performance. Just because all the things he has to do, like he has to be funny, like you have to be like at least laughing at him, but you have to also buy his commitment to it, and you have to want to follow this character, and just so much with it because I don't think De Niro, maybe some in his later career where some of the stuff he's done now, but like especially this stage of his career, I don't think he's considered like a comedic, definitely not considered a comedic actor, but in general, I don't think he's thought of as a funny person. But if you watch some of the stuff he does, like some of the subtle physical comedy he does here, when he's doing the kidnapping, when he gets out and he drops the gun, and when the scene where he's like flubbing with the cue card, just so many like little subtle like comedic moments where he just has that timing down so well, and just like and I was watching it this time and I realized like it's really, even though it is a dark comedy, it's really an exploration of mental illness. Completely from the point of view who's the person who's mentally ill, because you see they show you what he thinks it's happening, and they make him out to be like, oh, these are just his daydreams or whatever, but then he acts on them. He's literally acting as if those things really happen, and it makes it confused. Like it's almost confused, especially if you watch it for the first time. Like, did that really happen? Did he see that? Did they talk that way? And but I think that's just a really, really interesting take on it, is to see like how his you know, he's not just obsessed. Like this guy's like mentally ill. Like he thinks he's doing the right thing. He thinks he should be there. He thinks he belongs. He thinks he's in on this.
Yeah.
I don't want to try. The crazy thing about this is like 2 years separates this and Bull. Like, if you like think about it, like, and he's a terrible comic. Like Raging Bull near the end, like he thinks he's the funniest guy, and he goes into this to be funny. But two polar opposite performances, like completely 180s of themselves, like of like the man of the world, the physical comedy that he plays, the physical role he plays, and to switch into this, like it's just mind blowing what De Niro doesn't like. If you roll through De Niro's career, I don't know how many people bring up the King of Comedy as a role, but once you watch it, there's no denying like where it is. Like I'm with you. Like if it's a standalone movie, if I had to pick performances and separate them from the films, this is the most different he's ever been in any movie that is good. Like sure, he probably bad and dirty grandpa, but like overall, yeah, I just think it's crazy. I just think Tim, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I love this movie. This is top 5 Scorsese for me. It's not my favorite movie that we're going to talk about tonight, but it's top 5 Scorsese from the moment I saw it. This was great. It inspired one of the best films of all time. Sorry, I just wanted to see you would smile at that. You get what you fucking deserve. Anyway, no, but if you really look at it, this movie's really sad. Like when you really narrow it down, because the genius of the movie, and Kirk, like I was about to say alluded to it, but he basically said it. The mental health stuff, like, and you watch this whole movie. You get to that ending where you actually see him watching his performance on the TV, right? And he knows what the repercussions are. He knows what's going to happen to him. And he is hyped. Like he's watching this on the TV. He's showing this girl in the bar. Like I said that I knew, what's his name in the movie? Jerry, what?
Langford.
Yeah, I said I knew it, Jerry. Look at him. Here I am on his show. And when you just actually take in everything that he says in it, like I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, it was like a week ago I watched it, but he talks about like how his parents are both dead, but earlier in the movie he's living with his mom and hearing his mom yell at him, and like those like levels in there, like it's one of those things where like I think this is going to sound really shitty and I don't mean to be douchey, but like,
yeah,
somebody could casually watch this movie and be like, oh, that was an interesting movie. Robert De Niro was really good in it. But when you like, and watch that scene at the end and just kind of think like, oh, he was funny on the show. Haha. But like, when you really unpack like everything he's saying in that scene, playing it off as jokes, it adds like a whole new layer when you go back and rewatch the movie again. When he talks about how his dad beat him, and he was like, he says something like, I thought the best, like, I forget what the exact quote is, but he's like, I thought the only way that I would be grown up or whatever is, I forget.
Vomiting.
Yeah. And so he like says stuff like that, and he just says so much stuff in that one monologue. And it's played off where, like, if you were to look today and see, like, John Mulaney do, like, a bit, that exact bit, but then, like, put into the context, like, we would sit there and be like, best Netflix special of the year, woo. But when you put it into context of everything we've seen about this guy from the earlier 90 minutes, which I believe I said earlier, this is shorter than Mean Streets. Another short one. Good job, guys. It's just, I think it's like next level writing, and the performance from De Niro. It's insane. Like it's you can, like I said, you can watch it at face value as a dark comedy. There's lots of really great uncomfortable sequences that bring out the laughs and stuff, like when they're heading to Jerry's house and you just know like this is not going to end well. And the butler, or like the guy, like the doorman or whatever, is awesome. He's like, Mr. Langford, they're not leaving. They came in. I don't know what to do. You need to come in. Like, he's awesome. You did good, Mr. Langford. Like, he's fantastic. But it's just there's so many more layers to the movie. It's so fucking good. Like,
I think one of the most telling scenes is the fantasy he has where he's on the show and they bring the girl out. They're going to get married, and his high school principal comes out and he's like, "I just wanted to tell you that we all said you'd never make it, but you made it, and we owe you a big apology because you did so much better than all we ever thought, and so much better than the rest of us." And that is just like the ultimate, like, high school, like, I'm going to show them, you know what I mean? Like, and just the fact that tells you so much about, like, his motivation and where his mindset is. Crazy.
Well, and I know Bar wants to say something, so I'll shut up after this. But
That's what I was about to get about.
To that point too, this scene very early on where he's pretending to have like lunch with him, and he's like, "Jerry, I can't give up my life to do the show. You want me to do the show? I can't do it, Jerry." It's like those moments are like when you just get that little peek in his head. Like I was watching it with Maggie, and she wasn't like focusing on it like I was, but she was like in and out, and she was like, "Oh, so is this like a jump forward?" I'm like, "No, he's imagining all of this. He's cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs." He's just imagining this in his basement right now. Sorry, Bar, go ahead.
Well, you were talking about the stand-up routine he does on the show, and I actually wanted to ask a question because I thought about this as I was watching that scene again. Do we think that, because this is kind of what I was wondering, do we think that the laughter that we hear on there is not real, but it's just him imagining that there was laughter there?
You could definitely interpret it that way.
I think
that's how I
interpret
interpret
that way,
it.
but and maybe this is, I don't know if people agree with this take or not. I think his stand-up out of context is actually a decent stand-up set.
That's what I was saying by like the John Mulaney thing. I think like if a stand-up comic did that set,
yeah,
and take the rest of the context of the movie out of it, it's actually a very well written, good, funny set. It's just knowing the context of the rest of Rupert's life that makes it like depressing as hell. But I definitely see it that it's real, that it is happening. But I see, you especially interpret it that way,
especially because you look at like stuff on Carson. It's like you watch an old rerun of Carson with like a mediocre stand-up, he's still getting pity laughter. So at the very least, like Rupert's getting pity laughter, but I think it's actually a good set. So I think he's getting actual laughter.
Right, but the two reasons I say that are, one, what the cop says to him as he's taking him away to the car. Like something along the lines of,
"Who wrote that? I'd like to arrest them."
Yeah, exactly. But the other thing is that when we see him practicing that in front of his cardboard setup of an audience,
you hear laughs.
The sound is almost exactly the same laughter.
That's interesting. I've never noticed that. That's
maybe it is.
It's
false.
Very similar, at least.
That's
or if any. And again, like,
we're unpacking things. We're opening box. I like it. I like where we're going.
Play devil's advocate. I actually really like that interpretation of it. Yeah. It's not quite how I see it, but I like it. But you could also say that, like, at the show they have like cue cards that say like laugh here and
or it could just
but if it's very similar, that's interesting.
Here's the thing, I feel like if he didn't get laughs, then the studio would have just edited in canned laughter over it because we know it's not live.
Well, the other thing, and to be fair, like again, like this, we're diving really much deeper than I think is intended, but at the same point, they do, so it cuts away right when he starts his bit. It cuts back to Jerry, and I can't remember the character's name.
Marcia.
Thank you. Right? But when it cuts back to Rupert being done and he's coming off stage and the curtains closing, there is like a ton of applause. So like I think there is an audience there that's like doing something, but yeah, I do like that interpretation of like I think that's part of the Bar's pointing to something of like that Kirk alluded to. The character we see it's all from the perspective of him. He's clearly very, very mentally unstable. So who knows what's real and what's not?
And I
Well,
just
it's also not.
the one-
It's also not uncommon for Scorsese to leave the stuff up to audience interpretation
absolutely.
throughout his films. Like
when
that's something.
the thing doesn't stop spinning.
We've never
I'm sorry,
never
go on.
seen a moment though in King of Comedy
You're a train.
where like there's not a moment in all of his fantasies. All of his fantasies happen when Rupert's alone. There is not
That's
a
true.
fantasy that happens with other people in the room, and so that for me, and like I think the cop's just kicking him while he's down.
Yeah.
I think the cop's just
Which is
being
bad.
an asshole.
Yeah.
But
I
think it's an interesting point though.
just to allude to that scene though, that scene that Bar was talking about where he's practicing, that to me is the most surreal scene in the movie.
Yes.
Because you have him in his basement and he has that little set with the cardboard cutout. It's like, okay, I could buy that. But then he goes in front of that wall and it's this giant wall, like this giant poster, like, okay. And then they pan back and it's like this weird metallic, like you're not in his apartment anymore. Like it's like this weird metallic giant hallway, and it's almost like
like
at
he's
that
in like a
point
studio or something.
you are completely inside his head. I think at that moment, like that's like you're getting like an unfiltered view of his head. And I just want to talk about that scene for a second because I thought that was just one of the coolest scenes. Because like the other scenes are like at least based in some reality, like he's in a real situation, and in that one he is just like in another world.
I think this is he does another film just like this film in Shutter Island, not in the same regards, but when you watch this movie a second time, the things you pick up on it that are different than you didn't realize. Because if you the fascinating thing about the King of Comedy is if you watch this movie as just a movie, like in general, like it could be Jerry Lewis, Robert De Niro, they're funny, they're doing this bit, he thinks he's great, he's going to be the guest, blah, blah. But when you deep dive and you look into the key text, like how mentally broken, like, Rupert Pupkin really is, it's a fascinating, like, study of where this can go. So I think that was one of the things that I gathered from this time. And again, it's like inspired, like we joke about it, like the Joker. Joker is very, very heavily inspired by the King of Comedy, basically a comic book version of it. And that when it dissolves from reality to real, like they do more of in the Joker, they do more of a like in your face dissolve when the world switches, which like or dislike, I think it's fascinating. Like when he's in that apartment and it fades down, and she's like, "I have no idea who the hell you are. You need to get out." That's what's fascinating in this movie because if you watch this for one time, I think you can just glance over and you'd be like, "Yeah, that was funny. I enjoyed it." Blah blah. But the context of it, I think, is very important. Like where you can deep dive this movie and get different perceptions, like what Bar said. Like we're all saying, "Yeah, probably, maybe not," but like we can all be like, "Yeah, it's the fake laughter. It's all in his head, blah, blah." Like, that's something fun what he's able to do. So, Bowman, did you have anything that you were wanting to bring up from this movie?
Yes. I just wanted to bring up, like, this is not a specific scene, but just kind of larger with the movie itself. Like, I think this is a movie that, like, I kind of understand why at the time it wasn't as big, but I think now it just hits so differently. And I think that has to do with like fan culture, now, like, and I find this the same way with like a movie like The Cable Guy. It's very similar in that, where you have these movies where characters are so, kind of to the point of violently obsessed with TV and culture and all these other things to where it's the point, like, there are so many, like, even in our niche little community, there are certain people who take some of their obsessions to the point where it's like you can kind of see the Rupert Pupkin, and it's really interesting. And I just find that this movie just feels really ahead of its time in a lot of ways.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as this one becomes more readily available to like as film communities grow and stuff like that, I think this is like getting that cold. And I mean, I think people are discovering it too. Like, again, no shot at like Joker, but like when that movie came out and people cut a ripoff, then to go check out the King of Comedy, like I think is, again, like I think this movie has so much to talk about even nowadays than when it was made in the 80s. Like I think it's like crazy because when you think of something or you're obsessed with something or you're like in that fascination, what that can do to somebody that is mentally unstable or mentally ill, or they don't know how to outline, they want acceptance, they want that thing, and the drive that people will go to do it. It's kind of scary where it can lead to. So, by the way, also Jerry Lee Lewis, one of the best slaps in when he's like held at the gun and like finds his babies and just knocks her to the ground and like he handles everything like such, like sitting across the table, he straight face just like and like the phone call, like say what
beautiful.
I have to say this because if I don't say this, say exactly what we're saying. No, I have to tell them this so they know it's actually me. And then he gets to go, I'm busy. I'm telling you right now, put this person on the phone. This is Jerry. Like, I know who I am. Like it was such a fascinating breakdown because two people. No, this will work this way. I also love when like De Niro's there and goes, so you're here, so we can just take you now. Yeah, you could. That's possible. But I know where Jerry is, and if you need to, I can get you to Jerry once I see it live. Like he's like, this doesn't make perfect sense where we're at right now because you're clearly here. Like we have you in custody if we wanted to take you. I think it's so funny. The jokes the awkward jokes that hit way better than they were at the time. Like for me on a rewatch, but then I got more from it on a rewatch than I did prior. So. It keeps growing for me. It's amazing.
On that point, like I'm gonna compare it to a movie. I don't know if anyone on the call has seen this movie, but last night I watched the movie Very Bad Things, which is a film that is also a dark comedy. But I find that the comedy and the dark drama of the situation did not mesh whatsoever. Whereas this movie so perfectly. Every moment is equal parts funny and disturbing. And that's what I think is so brilliant about the movie is it's not like, oh, here's a funny scene, here's a dark scene. They go hand in hand.
Mm-hmm. No, I totally agree.
Absolutely.
I mean, that cue card scene is one of the funniest things I've ever seen. And just the fact that like he's reading the cue cards like, basically, these people are going to murder me if you don't do what they say. But like his main emotion at that moment isn't fear; it's just exasperation. When he's like,
he's annoyed.
He does that. He was like, "You cards upside down," like just completely at the end of his rope, like these idiots.
He's like when he says the card is upside down, and like when he's standing there when the door guy lets him in and they're having that conversation, and then he's like sitting there and he's just like I have a life. You know what? I looked up to you, Jerry. You know I did. He's like, join the club. Like, I don't care. Like, get out of here. Like, haven't you ever thought that you're annoying? Like, well, you could have answered my call. Do you know there's a reason I didn't? Like, he's just true, dude. I love it. I know Tim's maybe away, but we're gonna get scores on it.
Yeah, I just need a couple more minutes. Just keep going. I'm still at a 5 stars. It's perfect.
Okay. Yeah. Boatman, you're at 5.
I'm at 5.
Are you at 5 stars for the movie?
Oh, yes.
Bar, what were you going to say? Sorry, I didn't cut you off.
I just want to say one thing that's just super quick. Sandra Bernhard should have become a much bigger person after this movie. I swear to God, she's fantastic in it.
Oh, yeah, she's really good.
So this went up for me, actually. 4.5.
It doesn't get enough credit of that waiting room scene, like them waiting and them talking to him, and like, no, I talked to Jerry personally, and like, I know, we'll get back to you. Just send us your club. Like, she is a way, and then when he storms up there and like goes, I was like, what? He's a court. I'm thinking about installing her mind. I'm at 5. It is at 4.5. I don't remember. It may have been a misslide for me or something. I don't know. 5 seems not going to screw up, but it should have been 5 stars from all. It's a fantastic.
Did you say a misslide, like your finger, like sliding? Like to the
Yeah,
stars?
like I don't know if like I thought I was at 5. And
Interesting. I like that terminology. That's interesting.
maybe
It's like when Maggie accidentally gave every Terrence Malick film a 2 stars. She like misslided.
No,
it.
that was correct. That was probably
Oh,
correct.
got it. My bad.
Yeah, you're good, buddy. Tim, not Tim, Kirk.
I got this at 4.5 now.
Okay,
Ooh, that's
Hey,
high
there you
praise
go.
from Kirk. I like it.
there we go. Now we're on to a film for Tim brought it. Some would say Damien Chazelle wishes that he could do old Hollywood this way. Go ahead and tell us why you chose The Aviator, and thank you for picking The Aviator instead of another movie that came out 2 years later. And to argue with me and Kirk would have not been fun.
Yeah, no, my favorite part of this whole thing was when I was literally about to put in the chat a GIF of The Aviator, and Kirk put a comment in that said, "Can someone please not pick The Departed?" And then he removed the message. I posted The Aviator, and he said, "Thank you, Tim." It was beautiful. No, I mean, yeah, you look at the 2000s, like we already mentioned Gangs of New York a little earlier. I like that movie a lot. I don't love it. And it's not because of Cameron Diaz, frankly. People hate her. She's fine. Like
I agree.
I don't hate her. I don't love her. It's just it's fine. Like it's whatever.
What do you dislike from Gangs of New York? We'll
Goes
stop on
on
that
way
side
too
tangent.
long. The most interesting part of the movie happens about an hour and a half, an hour 45 in, and then it still goes for another hour. It has no
Which, not to like try to pick a fight with you at all, but I'm like, that's when the Scorsese, like, that's when the Diaz DiCaprio like hangout scene happens for like way too long, and no one gives it. Like when they take Bill the Butcher off the screen, I'm sorry, you're just losing.
Yeah.
You're losing the audience. Like, do we want Bill the Butcher? Bring him back.
But
Go
yeah,
ahead.
so you're looking at the 2000s. You really have only have Gangs of New York, Aviator, The Departed, and then
Shudder.
No, Shudder's 2010. I think that's it. I think it's those options.
He only has 3.
And
Wow.
so when you look at those options, like I wasn't going to pick The Departed. I do think The Aviator, it's an Oscar-winning film. Clearly, people like it, love it, you could say. I think this is top 10 Scorsese. It is my, I'm trying to look, it is my second least favorite of the 5 we're talking about tonight. So, but I like it much better than Gangs of New York. And I don't like it as much as The Departed, but I think this is one of those movies where it's like, it's hard to explain. There's like a moment you have watching a movie sometimes where you're like, this is just the shit. Like, this is just awesome. Like,
Yeah.
so great. And I remember I saw this for the first time watching it on Netflix. I could go and look, but I'm not going to look when it was. And I just remember laying there. I was laying on my couch watching the movie, and it's 3 hours. Never missed a beat the whole time for me. The cast is stacked, by the way. And you get to the end of the movie, having gone through so much emotionally, and also just like, it's easy to say like it's a biopic drama, like there's not much going on, but the plane sequences in this are insane. The plane crash scene is so fucking good. And then when we just get to the ending and he's just standing in front of the mirror and just what is it, the way of the future? The way of the future. Way of the future. Way of the future. And then just cut like, wow, oh my god. It's not my favorite Leo performance in a Scorsese movie. It's up there though. It's really good. It's probably my second. I just think that like it's just so exceptional from start to finish, and especially because you look at like the different, like, this is another one where like mental health plays a big part in the film. And I think like starting it off with like the scene of him as a boy with his mom, and then you kind of cut to a longer period of time in the movie where like he's obviously insane, but like it could just be like, he's an insane movie director. I need all these cameras, blah, blah, blah. I need this food this way. I want these chocolate chip cookies with this many things, like da 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 da. But then like there's little moments where it's just, he goes just a little too like, and you look at it, you're like, oh, there's something really off with this guy. Like this is like what's going on. And obviously Cate Blanchett is like, she's Cate Blanchett, like she's incredible. But I think everyone in this movie is fucking awesome. Scorsese directs the shit out of this. I think this is like his what's the way to put it, like biopic masterpiece. Like if you're looking at like, and again, like some of the crime movies he does are real life people that you could consider biopics. Yeah. So I consider those something different. But I think like as far as like straight like drama, looking at one person and really deep diving into that person, this is like S tier, God tier movie making. Like from start to, it's just so smart from beginning to end.
I think it's one thing to like do a biopic by a director like this about like filmmaking and stuff, where you can just see like the heart and like the attention to detail he does in this movie. I think it's fascinating because if you ever like heard him talk about films, and not just his films, but like films in general, like what he loves, it's just like I could just listen to that for hours, just hearing him gush about other films that he likes, if I watch them, because he watches a lot of movies I've probably never seen. It's a big problem with Scorsese. He likes a lot of other things. But yeah, I think it's a fascinating story. And where he's able to pull. I've always found it fascinating with Scorsese, and I think I get it in this one a little bit more than some. But even some actors that I don't expect from like performances that were like that, he got that performance out of that actor. Like I think that's just fascinating. He makes it's like everybody that shows up to set with him like puts on their A game. Like I don't know if they've only got one in them, but like you never see him reach that level again, and he gets it out of him every time. Like now that's not Cate Blanchett. Cate Blanchett is like one of the greatest actresses working, but like even her performance of like, and how they haven't made a biopic about Cate Blanchett and cast Cate Blanchett,
Cate Blanchett stars.
Cate Blanchett. She can do it and be great.
The unbearable weight of Blanchett talent.
But I'm saying, like, if Katharine Hepburn biopic needs to happen, like, why there's a story to be told there, and I just think it's fascinating. Again, and I'm also not a big fan of like old Hollywood, I would say. Not that I'm not a big fan of it. I just don't gush over it. I don't think it's like the most amazing time in cinema. I don't like overly love it. But what he's able to attain it, he makes me care about it more than some directors and some films have ever done, which is interesting.
I didn't mention the old Hollywood thing. I do think that like, I'm not going to say that's like my least favorite part of the movie. But like,
it's not your favorite.
It's not like it's there. But like, I didn't go into this movie like, I literally like when I watched this movie, I watched it because I'm like, oh, Martin Scorsese, Leonardo DiCaprio, planes. He must be a guy who flies planes. Didn't know it was Hughes. Literally didn't know he was a director. Knew nothing about the Hollywood stuff. Like knew nothing. So like, it's the part of the movie that like I'm much more interested in like the psyche of him than the old Hollywood thing. Like,
absolutely.
I don't think that it's. I think Scorsese does it really well in this movie, but I don't think it's at like the forefront of his mind, like it is in something like Babylon, for example. Like, I don't think like Chazelle is making a movie about old Hollywood. I don't think that's what Martin Scorsese is doing.
Everybody else,
yes, it's a terrible film, but. Yeah.
One thing I want to point out is just like
you've avoided the departed problem. Let's not start this thing. Seriously.
I think the technical aspects of this movie are just brilliant. Which like not that they aren't always in Scorsese movies, but specifically here, I just think they are so smart. Like one detail that I love that I didn't find out until like 2 watches of this movie ago. The like color palettes used in the movie are mimicking what colors were actually like available to use in like film stock at the time. So it's like, and that's why as you go forward, like there's more variation of color in the movie, because basically as cinema progresses, the technical capabilities of the film also progresses, which is like really cool, and I just think an awesome detail. I think DiCaprio is great in this. I will also correct a statement I said earlier. This was my second Scorsese movie. I actually feel really confident that I watched this one second. Because it's PG-13. You know, I think he has exactly 3 non-R-rated movies, and not including documentaries. So yeah. Maybe I don't know what Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore is, but I definitely didn't see that one until
Casino. I broke both.
I coughed up a lung. But no, like I really love this movie so much, and I love the old Hollywood stuff, but I love the stuff that's like even separated from that. Like I think all the like Senate hearings are really interesting. I like those a lot, and like kind of the conspiracy, and I love like Alda is not like amazing in it, but I think he's doing a really solid performance, and he is like, I think it's very interesting to like pick this actor who's like kind of one of the friendliest faces we know. Like Alda is just a very disarming presence, and to like use him and have him be a very like subtly threatening person, I think is really interesting, and that's something Scorsese's really great at. I think we talked about it with Jerry Lewis, is like someone who's more like goofy and wild, and Scorsese gets like a very understated performance out of him. This, I think, when we talk about The Irishman, we'll talk about something kind of similar. Like I think he's just very good at doing that.
Hey, I know Bard probably maybe just stepped away, but I think Bar's got like 9 minutes left with us. So I didn't know if we want to get his take on this. If I'm correct, 9 minutes, right?
Roughly, yeah.
Okay. So if you want to talk about Aviator, go for it.
Yeah. So this was the one movie I had not seen yet. And I really enjoyed it. I didn't necessarily quite love it, but like this was one that I really, really enjoyed watching. I thought the performances were great. I thought at the beginning, DiCaprio sometimes falls into a problem with me where I watch him and I go, he's playing Leonardo DiCaprio. But as the movie progressed, I think he really fell into the character, and I thought he did a really good job with it. Kate Blanchett, of course, amazing. Adam Scott,
That's the one I was talking about.
Like, I really liked him in this movie, and I wanted to see more of him and John.
He might only have one movie.
John C. Reilly's the other one that I was like big on.
He gets players that you just don't normally expect to just play up 3 levels with him. It's crazy.
I mean, you would have known about John C. Reilly if you saw Magnolia, but
I seen it. It stays right where it's at. So
gotcha. Okay.
Frog should have killed him. Go ahead.
But the one scene that I really, really liked a lot, like one of my favorite scenes in any of the movies that we're going to be talking about today, is the scene where Hughes and I don't remember Alec Baldwin's character's name. But when they're talking through the closed door, like the scene where they're talking like through the closed door is such a great scene. Because like there's not really much happening aside from just like, you know, seeing them in these 2 separate areas. But the dialogue is so good that it's kind of like you're kind of on the edge of your seat to see what's happening. So yeah, a lot of great performances. Alan Alda, fucking hell, dude, I love that man. he just plays like a scummy politician like so well. But yeah,
those Senate meetings are so
The cast is just like, it's literally insane. Like, we've already brought up Alan Alda, Kate Blanchett, Alec Baldwin, John C. Reilly, but Kate Beckinsale, who I like in the movie, Ian Holm, Danny Houston, Gwen Stefani, Jude Law.
Gwen Stefani, yeah, that's crazy.
She's good in the movie.
I know.
It's crazy. Francis Conroy, Brent Spiner is in this. Willem Dafoe shows up. Like, I think I said Ian Holm already, but just like it's literally just like nuts how many people. Like, this is like a who's who of like great actors. And I know that like we're not supposed to like talk about Alec Baldwin anymore or whatever, but like he really is really good. I really like him in the movie.
I think he was a
and whenever he shows up in like anything like that, like again, The Departed a couple years, I love him in The Departed. Like, I love him in this. Like, he's so good in these bit but not bit roles in these movies. Like, I think he's great. I think he's great.
We won't be talking about it tonight, but it's the thing that Scorsese gets is actors love his films and want to work under him. That, like the Jonah Hill thing from Wolf of Wall Street, he just wanted to be in the film. We take minimum just to be there, just to work on it. Like, he has such a presence because I think not only are you in a Scorsese movie, but you learn so much from the man there. Like, there's a reason. Well, he works with his who's who, of course, but like his loyalty, like to who he works with, is like something that's just unmatched in Hollywood. Like, the man sticks with who he has, and like, and again, I said it before, he just gets people to bat above their averages every time they're in a movie. There's not a shot that Adam Scott should be in a Scorsese movie and do as well as he's doing, because he's not that kind of actor, but he is, and it works super well.
Yeah, I love Alec Baldwin in this, and he has a great Jack Donaghy moment at the end. Like, it's literally shot like the last scene of a 30 Rock episode, where he's like, "TWA is going to Europe, Lemon." Like, it's just so perfectly done. Like, I think that's how they created that character, is based on this movie. No, I think this is, listen, me versus Cody talking about The Departed is a meme at this point. So this is by no means a shot at The Departed, honestly. Rewatching this, I honestly think this should have been Scorsese's Oscar winner of the 2000s. I think this should have been, again, independent from anything else. I think this should have been DiCaprio's first Oscar win. I mean,
I don't disagree with any of that.
This is such an amazing movie. You know, you were talking about that moment in the movie, Tim. Like, when I realized I was watching something super special in this rewatch, that scene where I think they're editing Hell's Angels, and they're in the editing room, and the camera's spinning, and they're showing everybody, they're tracking everybody with the film. My gosh, this movie looks so great. And just I feel like it's two different biopics. It's about a filmmaker. It's about the Aviator. It's about his mental health. There's so many different things going on in this movie. And Boatman hit on it with the colors and the technology. I didn't know exactly what it was, but it felt different. Like the old Hollywood stuff, like the way it's shot. Like, you get those big sweeping crane shots. And it's like fanciful, and then you get into like the nitty gritty stuff when he's building the airplanes. And the whole movie, it just feels like different movies. I think it's so well done. And yeah, the supporting cast is so good. Baldwin, we talked about, I think Jude Law is really good in his one scene. He just gets the most from anybody. There's just so many great Kate Blanchett, again, doing a real life person like this, who is very easy to do a character of. Like, Hepburn is somebody who you can really do, like, she's like one of those actors that like comedians do impressions of, and who's kind of like just that. You know, she has that voice and those mannerisms that you can do real easy. And she's from moment one, you know who she is. She knows she's Katharine Hepburn, but at the same time, you know, she's bringing a real life human performance to it. I think it's so hard to do. It's such a tough needle to thread.
What won Best Picture this year? Bowman, go now.
That was freaking $2 Million Baby.
Yeah, again, it's weird because we're talking about it. Like, if anybody hates Scorsese, it's the Oscars. Baby? Yeah, that's what he said.
Oh, did he? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
I think I talked right there. Scorsese, the Oscars hate Scorsese, and I think that's a clear indication, like throughout his entire run, and that's one of the reasons, like I think The Departed gets the hate that it does because, like, it was
one to
the win.
finally do it.
It's
Yeah.
the one that he won for, and he hasn't won since. And then they towed him out for the Irishman just to sit there all night to get nothing. Like, they hate him, and it's clear as day because.
To be fair, I don't think that he necessarily has. Every year that he's lost, I don't disagree with the loss. Like, clearly, I want him to win because I.
Well, have you seen Dances with Wolves?
No, I'm saying post The
Oh.
Departed. I'm saying post The Departed.
No, you're right. No, I don't blame. I don't. Again, he's going against, like, I think that year he went against Parasite, which, like, I get it. Like, that makes sense. Like, it makes a better statement. Again, he should have just stayed home, in my opinion. He's too old to be out in the weather and everything. Like, go home. Like,
Yeah, he's
stay
gonna
in
get a
bed.
bad hip if he keeps trying to do that.
Anything on Aviator before we move on to this?
I want to just talk. I might. This might have already been covered on a little bit because I had to go upstairs and get a little water. But I wanted to just talk about the great, like, tiny one scene performances in this movie. Like Jude Law as Errol Flynn. Willem Dafoe has a really great one scene role in this movie that I love. I just think there's a lot of, like, he just casts a lot of great people in, like, very small roles, and they all kill it.
Yeah, we briefly touched on, like, all the different people, but not specifically. But yeah, I agree. I think, like, we talked about how, like, he just casts, like, he has, like, his mainstays, but he also has just, like, bringing in people like Dafoe for the one scene or Jude Law and just absolutely crushing it.
I love the Dafoe scene where Howard just kind of claps back of, like, you ever done anything wrong? You ever, slept with someone you shouldn't have? You ever been like, just vaguely threatening him? It's brilliant. I love it.
Okay, well, we're getting scores. Tim.
This is 5 stars for me. I mean, the top, if I'm looking at my rankings, the top 8 Scorsese for me is 5 stars, and this is my number 6 of his filmography. So, yeah, this is 5 stars.
Can you go to the next quick? Sorry.
Yeah.
It's 5.
Okay. Bar, so you can go to bed.
The Way of the Future. 4.
I'm also 4 stars. It didn't go up or down. It just stayed where it is. Kirk.
Barr liked it so much he wore glasses for it.
Because they're aviators.
Wow. Don't explain.
Thank you,
explain the
Bar.
joke.
Thank you, Bar, for explaining it.
By the way, they're aiming. Get out of here. Get out of here.
It's because they're aviators.
Now, so I have an announcement on the roundtable. After the setup, these next 2 movies have now dethroned The Departed for me. I have a new number 1 and a number 2. Departed is still special. They were, like, tied in 3. They will not, like, I would watch them any day of the week. Just watching these 2 films, like, I get more and more every time. But we'll start with my second favorite Scorsese now. Goodfellas. Crazy. Thank you, by the way. I honestly, for the first time ever on Roundtable, I made somebody switch their pick. So, Kirk, you want me to say why you picked Goodfellas, or do you want to just say you picked Goodfellas?
I mean, it's fine. I mean, you want me to say what I originally picked?
Yes,
okay?
you can. Go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah,
I originally went with Cape Fear just because I thought that, maybe we were going to talk about some stuff that it doesn't get talked about as much. So I wanted to go with something a little more, off the beaten path. And then Cody and I discussed it, and Cody was like, well, I kind of really want to dive into his, kind of get into stuff we haven't, everybody loves it, but we haven't talked about it much. So really dove into it much, I should say. So let's do Goodfellas. I was fine with that because this is like top 3 all-time movie for me. Definitely my Scorsese, favorite Scorsese, pretty much always has been. And yeah, I think this is his, to me, his best of all time. I think everything up to his career at this point was leading to this. And I don't think, as much as I love a lot of the movies that came after, I don't think he's topped it since. I think this is, honestly, I don't know if there are very few filmmakers you can look at one movie and say that's it for them. But for me, I could do that for Scorsese. I could put this out as absolute top of the mountain. I just think it's such a great story. I think the script is so tight. It's so well told. It looks so great. It has like this kinetic energy. And like you see, it's crazy because, again, it's not as fully formed in Mean Streets, but you see that kind of energy in that movie, and the fact that he's still bringing that to the table 20 years later and perfecting it is crazy. And I think just every one of these actors who he's worked with a lot, De Niro, Pesci, both at the top of their game here. They bring in Henry Hill, blanking on his name, but he is So I mean, again, he gets a lot of he gets kind of a lot of heat in this movie. I think it's just because he's not Pesci or Liotta, Pesci or De Niro, but he is so good in this. And I think it's just so well told through his eyes, and just that life story. And you don't think of this as a biopic, but it is based on a real guy, and just the rise and fall that you see in this. It's such an epic movie. It doesn't have like the grandiose feel that a Godfather does, but I still think it has all those same elements of somebody going through this world and experience the best of times and the worst of times through that. And I think it's, in a lot of ways, it's timeline. It's very much goes through a lot of the same time as a lot of the Godfather and Godfather Part 2. So you see that world from a different angle. I think like a more level than you do through the Godfather. But I think it's very close in its quality and just its storytelling, acting, everything else. It's such a fantastic movie.
So what I will say is I suggest anybody. So I think, and this is not a fair thing, and I'm not like trying to backtrack or anything. I think I spent most of my, growing up and adult lives of having to defend Departed against all of Scorsese's work because it was my favorite instead of just enjoying it for what it is, because a lot of people come to you and say, oh, well, like about this and it won because of that, blah, blah. But when I take them as a whole now, this movie has grown more and more for me because I didn't watch it a ton growing up and didn't watch it a ton like as my college years were going on. I think I'm just appreciating it more and more because I pick up things new every time on the watches. Again, I suggest anybody that watches this just watch Ray Liotta's character through every scene that he's in. Don't watch Pesci and Jimmy. Watch how Ray interacts the entire way, because I think it's the most fascinating part of it. We'll talk about scenes and stuff, but he is the one guy in the entire movie that doesn't fit this lifestyle, but wants to be a gangster. It's the key word that starts. From everyone, remember, I wanted to be a gangster, but he's not a gangster. And he can never drive to that exact degree of being a gangster in this movie. And you can see it scene over scene over scene when he's in it. He's the toughest guy in the room when the guy messes with his wife and he goes across the street and beats the shit out of him because he's out of that world. But when he's in the world, he's the weakest member of the entire group, and you can tell it every time. When he goes to lock the door when the killing's going on, when he's holding the gun at the guy's face, he's nervous, he's scared the entire time. Even when they open the trunk and they do the thing, like he's standing there like, what am I like? I'm in too far. I'm at a level that I can't. I'm too far in. I can't get out. And this is where it is. And you pick up those little scenes, like the funny house scene. Is like I feel like you'll crack under test, like questioning, and like he's laughing, but like nervous laughing because everybody else around him is a real gangster, and he is playing the biggest pretend than anybody in the movie, and that's what makes me love it more because it's basically. What's the sheep and a wolf in sheep clothing? Like he doesn't fit. He's playing pretend, and that's what makes me love it.
He's a sheep in wolf clothing.
Right. He's wanting to be bigger than he is, and that's what made this movie, and it keeps going up on watches because picking up those little moments is fantastic. And I also, we'll talk about it. Talk about one of the greatest openings to any movie ever. Like I think it's arguably just from when did I hit something? Do I have a flat? And you're like, what are we going? And just when that trunk opens and the light and the saying, like it all just clicks in. It's just like I'm in, and I'm like, I don't know who could turn off a movie when it's like when he's holding the trunk and it freezes, and he's like, I wanted to be a gangster, and drops it, and you're just like, how are you not like? You can't turn that shit off at this point. You have to be completely in from get go. And the reason why I saved these two for last is because I think he gets a credit of being the mob guy. You're the gangster guy, your gangster film, all your films are exactly the same. But the last two films, this and Irishman, it's the one that considered so high, and basically the end of his mob movie is like the love letter to it at the end. I think it's beautiful. So we can talk scenes. We can go list by list, but
real quick, I just want to tell you something, Cody, because I know you particularly will enjoy this. I showed this movie to when I rewatched this. I watched it with my son. I showed it to him for the first time, and that scene. So obviously I'm watching him watch the movie, and that scene after they open the trunk and the music starts, I knew by his face. I was like, "We got him," because he was sucked in immediately. And
he only gave it 3 stars.
No, he gave it 4.
Oh, he gave it 4? Okay.
Yeah, he gave it 4. Yeah. And he was, and just watching him watch this movie, just seeing it. Yeah, someone seen it for the first time and experiencing that. Just what you said, like you are just, it sucks you in. That music starts, and you were on board for the entire movie.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Go ahead, Tim. Sorry.
No, I mean, so the first time I saw this, it was back in 2016. And it was during my, like I alluded or said earlier, like watching a bunch of random Scorsese hits. This was also, I've talked about it on Logged It and YLS, of like, there was a period of time where I was so obsessed with watching anything new. I didn't care if it was good, bad, whatever, that I would just go on Amazon, go to Blu-rays, filter it from like lowest price to highest price, and just buy like 25 $5 Blu-rays and watch all of them. And this was actually one of those movies, and The Departed was one of those movies. So I remember watching it the first time and thinking like, this is great. I don't love this, but it's great. And then when I watched it a couple years ago, is when I really, really started to love it. I agree with Cody that like the more I watch it, the more I like it. This is top 5 for me. I think this is number 5 on my list. It's just below King of Comedy, but above Aviator. I don't feel the same way about Cody, where like I feel like I need to defend my opinion of The Departed or I've spent so much time defending. I don't feel that. I've just always, The Departed's always been my favorite, because when I saw it, like the twists of the movie and the acting and everything, it was just something so new that I had never experienced at that time in my life. It just holds such a special place for me. And while I love Goodfellas, 5 out of 5 movie, it's just never been like, oh shit, like I gotta watch Goodfellas again, like immediately. Like I love it. I love the performances. I love so many moments in it. Like Cody said, we'll talk about different scenes. There are so many, and we talked about the whole opening. Like that opening is fucking amazing. I love the way that how plain the titles look, where it's literally just like, as long as I can remember, I've always wanted to be a gangster, and it's just like the titles of like a Martin Scorsese picture just like fly across the screen in like big fashion, but it's not some fancy like font like craziness. It's just like Goodfellas, like Martin Scorsese. Like it's just, it feels very down to earth, and I like that. And so I think it's one of those movies I appreciate a lot more than I love. I do love it. And it still is top 5 Scorsese for me, and I can confidently say that looking at my list. Like I would rather watch this movie than The Aviator, but I don't have that same like Cody said, he gets something brand new out of it every time he watches it, or he picks up on things new. I really don't. Like, so I've seen it like 4 or 5 times now. And I've watched it. Did we watch this when we were together, Cody? I don't think we did. I don't think so.
No.
So the last time I watched this was in 2021. So it's been 2 years, and or it might have been early 22, maybe early 22. And so it's been at least a year and a half, 2 years, and I felt pretty much the same about it afterwards. That like I think Leota is fantastic. I think people rag. It's another thing where it's like people rag on him. Like, I don't get it. Like, I don't understand why. Like, he's not Pesci. He's not De Niro. I think De Niro, honestly, of all the movies we're talking about tonight, this is his least great performance. Like, I think this is. I wouldn't say he's bad. He's not bad. But of the 4 movies that we're talking about that he's in, I like him the least in this. Pesci's fantastic.
Mean Streets.
I think he's better in Mean Streets.
Okay.
Personally, but
I'll have a counter for that, but I understand. I can get it. Yeah.
So I think just on the whole, like there's so much I love about it, and it's one of those movies that I know that every time I'm gonna watch it, I'm gonna like love it for like the Scorsese-isms, and like there are so many scenes that are just so fantastic. But I cannot say that it is my favorite. Which clearly Cody didn't. He spoiled it a little bit, but it's great. Like, you call me any day of the week, I will jump on and watch this movie. Like, it's so much fun. And also the other thing that people complain about, the people that complain that the last 40-30 minutes are boring or stupid or whatever when he's all coked out or whatever, go fuck yourself. It's great.
That's some of the most like
People say that?
Yes, that is honestly in my like the biggest complaint I hear about this movie is that the ending and like the last 30 minutes when he's like driving and he thinks he's being chased and everything is not great, which I think is insanity. It's fantastic.
Yeah, we'll deep dive that in a second. Both in your thoughts real quick, and then we'll just start.
Yeah. I want to paint a picture a little bit, and I think this should explain a lot about who I am as a person. You know, so when I was first started getting into movies, I kind of alluded to the fact that my options were a little bit limited when it came to the great directors.
Please don't tell me.
I was not a rebellious child. I think that should not shock anybody. I was pretty much a goody two shoes.
Okay.
My one exception to this is when it came to the movies, I would find a way to watch the ones I wanted to watch, even though I was not necessarily allowed to. And I distinctly remember going to Target, buying Goodfellas, and then sneaking it like in a dresser drawer and hiding it under some papers, so that my parents would not find out that I watched Goodfellas. In the same way that other people hid Playboys, I hid my DVD copy of Goodfellas.
I did that too, except it was with the Saw trilogy.
That's fair. But this is one I will always love. I think this is... People overuse the word masterpiece. I've maybe overused the word masterpiece. I think this is in the truest sense of the word, a masterpiece of a movie. I don't believe there's a second wasted. I don't believe there's an element of cinema being used here that isn't functioning at its highest percentage. I truly believe this is one of the greatest movies ever made. And on top of that, I love it, and it is my favorite Scorsese movie. I don't know. I think like if you measure length of movie versus how like up against how rewatchable it is, this is maybe like you can argue The Godfather, but for me, like this is just so rewatchable and feels like it's a 90-minute movie, even though it's like 2.5 hours.
It does. The pacing is really great.
Yeah, this is, and like somebody who we haven't we mentioned her, but we really need to give some props to Thelma Schoonmaker, who, like, yes, Scorsese is a genius,
right?
But I think it's important to say that I think his films would not be as good without an editor as good as her, and I think the thing about Scorsese. he is great at recognizing talent and surrounding himself with people who are at the best in their craft. And Thelma Schoonmaker is one of the best of her craft. And she's brilliant. And the editing in this, the pacing in this is brilliant. And there are so many things that are like, I mean, the Layla sequence is such a brilliantly edited thing. And like the way this movie, and the same, like very similar to The Aviator and a lot of other Scorsese movies, and it's one of the things he does that I love, is how like massive and decade spanning it is, and how we are able to really almost like get a picture of the outside world through this inside. Like we're tracking the growth of the United States in this time through the lens of this gangster era. And that goes to the soundtrack as well, and how it kind of changes through what is happening.
I think it's fascinating too about her is like, as good as she is, she doesn't work with anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
Like she, I mean, if he doesn't work, technically, she don't work. Like she does his films, and like that's a partnership. And like it's total opposite. But like Sandler takes care of his own. Same way with like Scorsese. If he finds you and he trusts you, like you're in the family. Like you're not going anywhere. So overall, this movie, the reason why like I think this movie is where you said a masterpiece, and I think as I get older, the more and more I appreciate this film. Like where I used to be like, yeah, it's Goodfellas. The thing is, I think what also was the problem when I first got to Goodfellas was hyped to an automatic level that was super high. My uncles loved it. My grandfather loved it. Everybody said, wait till you watch Goodfellas. And I'm a punk, teenager. Goodfellas ain't that great. No, it's great for me. It's overall just a beautiful film where it is. And I think it jump starts like where like he's a kid and he's just wanting to be a gangster and wearing the suit and doing all the stuff and getting in trouble with his parents, and the letter that goes home to the parent, and he walks up to him and like beats him. And, in a month, like as soon as this time when the dad like locked him, like before it even said, I'm like a month, because that's how angry he gets. And then just how gangster, like how that lifestyle could be for somebody that's like doesn't know where they're going in life, where he's like that guy, and they pick up the male guy and put his head basically in a pizza oven. He's like, next time you're going in the oven. Like that's freaky. Like at that time, like that's the gangster life, and that's where you're living. I think like, and Paulie, whoever, I don't remember the actor that played Paulie. Like he passed away recently. Ray Liotta passed away. Like, there are some people good. Yeah, Paul Savino, they're just not there anymore, and like that makes it even sadder. Like overall, like this movie has like lost people from it, but from when he's a kid to where he like develops into like back to my doesn't fit the lifestyle. Even when the guy is dying on the thing, and they're like, don't touch it, and he's still like getting into, because he's not made for that lifestyle, and you can just see it through and through. I also love like the core, like how Jimmy stays like the straight and narrow, like at the beginning, like he's the guy like to do the thing, and he at the end of the film basically switches into Joe Pesci's like crazy, like because he's losing it near the end because he's trying to cover every hole before it all caves in on him. I think that's super fascinating too, where I picked up on this time more and more, because like I think that's interesting. I'm gonna jump all over the place. Somebody stop me and just point to a direction.
It's once
We've been
Joe
doing that the whole
Pesci,
time.
like
Good.
once Joe Pesci exits the picture, that's the point where he really starts kind of filling that void, and you kind of get the sense that Tommy was kind of what was keeping Jimmy grounded in a sense. Even though Tommy is not a person you would expect to keep somebody grounded, like Jimmy being able to be the calm presence next to Tommy. Without Tommy, he doesn't need to be the calm presence, and that's when he can start kind of flying off the handle. And I think that's really interesting.
and you get that first indication, the shoe shine boy, like when he's in there and he's just like that insult to where that is in the mob world, like just like, hey, get your fucking get your shine box, and he's like, yeah, you mother, like when when that loses it, and that first scene, like that scene where he actually goes crazy, is one of those like. I think that's the scene. That's the scene from this movie that like sparks it into a whole different direction. Because they're wise guys. They do what they need to do. They cigarettes. They do stuff. But when the killing starts, like that's where it's like brutal. Where it is. Yeah.
Well, speaking to Boatman's point about how Jimmy kept him grounded, I think like we talk about Henry not really being a part of this world, but you get a sense that Jimmy's a little bit on the outside looking in, like they tell he can't be made, and it's all about the Italians, and hey, get a drink for those two Irishmen down there. Like he's not fully immersed in this world. I think he's accepted more because of his talents and what he's able to do and the money he brings in. But Tommy is his, you see it when they think Tommy's getting made and how excited he is, because Tommy is his into that world. And once Tommy's gone, it's almost like he doesn't have to abide by those rules anymore. That whatever, morality that world created for him is gone once Tommy's not there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think it's all like, I think the scene that everybody talks about from this is the funny how. Like, I think that's the one that gets the most play because it's Pesci being like the most over the top ever, like telling the story. And I think it's funny too because of how that mob mentality. Because I've deep dove on Goodfellas, like the real people of Goodfellas and like the understanding of that life back then. But when he's telling that story, overall, the story's not funny. Like, and it plays not that funny, but everybody's laughing around him because he's the one telling it, and like he's the guy that you're going to laugh at the story because he's saying it. But when they do the funny how, and that guy comes up to him and like says, "Hey, you owe me $7,000," and he's like, "You fucking," like, throws him down. That next scene, I think, is just as good as the funny house scene, but I don't think when he sits down with Paulie to talk about buying into the restaurant. Paulie is one of the great character actors in this movie that I don't think people talk like. Of course, he's there and people bring him up, but when he's like they're sitting there blank staring at the guy and like having it, and he's like, "What do you want me to do? Shoot him?" That would work. And he just blank stares at Bags like. Sorry, I shouldn't have said that. Like, it's just like he's so fed up with him at this point because he's so annoying. He ruins everything. He's so chaotic, and he's like hard to fit into that lifestyle because like you always had that one guy in a mob that just makes things harder for everybody else, and that's him. And Paulie's like that grounded guy that just wants things normal, So I think that's really fascinating how that movie plays. Tim, talk about some of your favorite things.
No, I mean, you guys have said a lot of the great stuff. I was gonna say jokingly, but also semi-seriously that like we would be remiss if we did not talk about Mrs. Scorsese because I do love that scene. Like I know that's also another cliche scene, I think, but I love Pesci in that scene where they're sitting at the dinner table, and what does he say? They hit a. Did they? I don't even think he says a deer.
They hit a deer.
Is it a deer? And he's like, "Oh, you don't want to see it, Ma. It's all up in the grill, and like I gotta scrape it out."
Can't leave it in. It's a sin. It's a sin.
Yeah.
It's a sin.
The what do you call it? The hoof.
And there's you guys pointing out a lot of stuff, but for me, but like the whole fact of like Leota wants to be in this world but doesn't necessarily belong and is almost uncomfortable with a lot of stuff going on but goes along with it anyway, and that's a great moment where like they're talking about like no, it's so like the look on his face during that scene is like we're sitting here with this wonderful woman who's put out all this food for us. We're having a great meal and we're just like lying to her straight. And we've got a dead guy in the car and he looks so uncomfortable and so just like about the situation. I think that scene is great. And I also really, again, another complaint I hear about this movie is that I don't know the actress's name, but who plays his wife,
Lauren Bracco.
Oh yeah.
that she's just okay in the movie. I think she's really great. I think her scenes in the movie.
Powerhouse.
I think her scenes in the movie are awesome. And
You know who she lost to at the Oscars? You know who she lost to?
no,
Dancing with Wolves, the Wolf number 2.
No. Whoopi Goldberg for Ghost.
Oh my goodness.
I've seen that movie.
That's weird. No, but when she shows up at that, the girl that she's cheating on with the thing, and it's like, and she's just yelling outside of her apartment, "He's my husband! I'm gonna tell everybody unless you let me in that there's a whore at this house," and you just like killing it. She's like, "I'm gonna call your landlord and say there's a hussy and blah blah blah," and her name is, and she's just screaming. And then when he like, I get it. We can say all day how he shoots these films. Like, we can talk ad nauseum about him. But, like, when she goes to see Henry in prison and the camera pans to the book and scans across and sees the name and it pans back up to her, and she's like, why don't she stay up till hours? God, why don't she smuggling meat for you? Like, just throwing it. I think she's absolutely fantastic because she's the only female in the entire movie that stands up to the men in the movie. Like, she doesn't have any, like, all the other, like, when she sits there and talks about them.
From the get-go, when she shows up and is like, he's like, I'm sorry, I thought it was next week. No, it was fucking tonight. Like, she's just like in front of everyone.
I'll see about it. I'll figure it out. But when she sits down with all the ladies and they're talking about it, she goes, I'm going to go nuts if I sit there. They're all like wagging and talking about beating the kids and she's angry. Like, it's fascinating. I think she's absolutely fantastic in this movie. And if she doesn't get enough credit for it, she deserves every ounce of it because she is such a powerhouse with Henry. Like, and when she does that monologue, when he wakes up and she's got the gun over him, and she's like, and the people that always talk about this movie, like, the negatives that I hear is the narration that plays throughout, like, when they talk it over, and I think that adds so much to the film. But she's like, even then, I can't leave him. Like, I can't shoot him. I can't even leave him. Like, at that point, like. And then he takes the control. He's like, and how when we're talking about the paranoid scene, I think that's such a fascinating scene because he's so paranoid and so freaking out and like looking for the helicopter everywhere he goes.
The way we were talking about Thelma earlier, the way the movie picks up its pace and the editing kind changes for the whole last 30 minutes is next level, top tier
like
film.
You're on speed with it.
Yeah.
Like, you're going with the
crazy.
same direction.
And talking about, we haven't talked about the soundtrack for this movie much, but at that part of the movie when they put up that title card and that bass line kicks in, that boom, 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 and then it just goes, and that's when we start seeing that. And whoa! It's just so perfect, and just catches that energy of kind of like psychotic, paranoid energy. It's so good.
Yeah. And I also love where they tell it, where like Pesci gets into that room and because he knows like where he's at because he's done it so many times, like where it's like going. It's just so fat, like. It's basically like it's picking up steam. One thing I really like, and I think it's like a creative choice, but like Paulie and at the end when he's testifying and they've got like the dark shadows, like they look like completely like soulless, like at that point, like they look beaten and torn and done. Like at that point, like this is it. They're sitting across from somebody that they trusted and brought into this family and just basically watch him turn. But they were going to turn on like, and I think they push Henry out just as much as Henry rats on him because he's like, they give me $3,200, that ain't enough to pay my rent. Like he can't even get by with what they're doing. So I think it's a fascinating where they're able to like die and like push Henry out and give him really no options. And and even the sentence goes, I can't leave my mother. Like when she's saying the scene, like, I can't leave. Well, I don't want to go without you, but I will if I have to. And De Niro's trying to get his wife into the spot, like, hey, just come talk to us. And she's like, fuck you. I know exactly what this setup is, and I am not doing it. And backs away slowly. That Layla scene too. I think we talked about it, but like, that's one of Scorsese's best shots of all time. The pan up to the paint, like, and the two dead bodies just sitting there, just like, where does this movie go? It just keeps going. So again, I can gush for hours if anybody wants to pick up scenes, or we can go into Irishman. I know we're running long tonight. So.
I have two more main points I want to make.
Yeah.
The first one is I just kind of love, like, when you were talking about, you know, the car moment, and right, like, the movie opens with the car scene, and then we come back to it. But I think what is so interesting about it is, like, that's the exact, not in terms of runtime, but that's the exact midpoint of the movie, like, in terms of the plot. That's the moment when we go away from the rise and we start going into the fall. Is like, we are at the peak. Now Billy Bats is dead, and now it's downhill. Like, we made it to the top of the hill, and now everything's going down. And I think that is so interesting that, like, that's our lead-in moment, is that start of the thing, and that's where everything comes from. So I think that's really unique. The other thing I wanted to bring up, and I feel bad that I keep bringing up other, like, non-Scorsese movies, but I think it's important to compare this. Comparing to this movie right here, The Godfather is a very secluded movie. You know, you never see any of the ramifications of the actions of the Corleones or anybody else. It is very much within the mob world, and sure, you get a little bit with Kay's perspective, but you don't see anyone actively harmed by this. I think that's the thing that is so interesting, is that even within the first 10, 15 minutes of the movie, you're seeing people, regular people, being beaten, being hurt. Like, you are seeing all of, like, the negative effects of this, but you also see the seductive elements that would still drag Henry in. And I think that's really interesting. And one thing I wanted to comment on Ray Liotta's performance, because we're all talking about it, and it's kind of a piggyback off of what you said, Cody. And you're right. He's not playing a gangster. He's playing somebody who wants to be a gangster. And I think it's very similar to people's complaint with Matt Damon in True Grit, which is someone who feels like he wants to be a cowboy, not like a real cowboy. And, like, that's kind of the point of the character, is I think, like, they're playing it exactly right, because they shouldn't feel like they fit in 100%, because that's not the character.
I think it's also interesting with this movie is basically, in most mobster movies, the family gets taken out by other members of the family. This is one of those rarities that the family or the group basically takes out their own. The group that you go accustomed to and get to know it, the holes have to be filled up. So they dump, they start taking out people left, right, and center. And you're like, holy shit. Like they have a mob movie, a family movie is, the family, you don't turn against the family, but they have no right or reason in that movie. So my whole thing is, like, Henry, why wouldn't Henry turn them in? He's seeing everybody else around him drop like flies. Like, I'd sell him up the river too. Like, everybody that he went to do jobs with are now in dumpsters and trash trucks and freezers. And, like, Jimmy just got, Pesci, Tommy just got taken out. Like, everybody that they know is dropping. So, it's kind of survival of the fittest, and he does what they couldn't do and gets them taken out. I think it's, again, fascinating. Anything before we move on? Because I know we're running late. I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say, doing some research on Scorsese, I think it's important to point out, did you guys know that this man has been married 5 times?
I did not know that he had been married that many times.
He said 5 spouses. To be fair, though,
Half of them. How many have
his
died
his
before?
wife that he's married to currently, he's been married to since 1999. So like,
Okay.
it might have been
So he was a playboy.
during his drug-induced stages of the first. I wanted to
Look
point
at
out
them
that
eyebrows.
Marty likes to get around. So.
Them eyebrows, do a lot of the heavy lifting.
Well, especially after Shark Tale, he really,
yeah.
man, like why didn't we pick? I should have picked.
I'm surprised his spouse. Shut up. I'm surprised his spouse stayed with him after.
What if
Shark
I
Tale.
had picked? Would you have let me pick?
I would have vetoed it. I would have vetoed it. Just like Bar tried to pick The Last Waltz. I said, "Get the hell out of here. That's not what we're doing today."
The Last Waltz is a great film.
It's a great film, but not what I'm wanting to talk about on this roundtable. I'm sorry. I'm talking about movies.
I will point out one scene, like talking about find something new in every rewatch. There's one great scene where it's when Henry's a kid, and I think he's going into scene like that montage where he's like running for Paulie. He goes into one of the shops and he's talking to Tootie or whoever. In the background, there's a bunch of gangsters. I think it's Paulie Walnuts from Sopranos is one of them. They're all pulling out these like yellow cardigan sweaters and trying them on from this big crate. And there's a tracking shot running down the street, and all the guys are like sitting outside of the shop, the taxi stand or whatever. And then he goes out, and there's all these gangsters wearing these ugly yellow cardigans. Never noticed that before. It's just fun little touches.
Oh wow, I didn't notice either.
Could have I picked Bad if I wanted to?
No.
No. All right. So we're ratings. I'm 5.
5.
You sure? Okay.
Okay.
So this is.
Can I ask, like, just out of curiosity, because we're already going long, so we might as well just like break a little bit.
Yeah.
We've already said the last movie is going to be The Irishman. Is there anything else from anyone's top 5 that we haven't brought up tonight?
I mean,
we brought up
Wolf of Wall Street, The Departed. We've talked about a little bit, and then the rest of my top 5 is brought up. I'm just curious what everybody else likes.
What is everybody's 5?
Silence is borderline top 5 for me.
That's my number 7. I fucking love them. Honestly, I knew Cody was gonna pick The Irishman, but if I could have picked 2010s, I would have picked The Silence with a bullet. Yeah.
What is everybody's 5?
Mine is Goodfellas, King of Comedy, Irishman, Wolf of Wall Street, Departed.
You went 5-1.
Yep.
Mine is King of Comedy, Wolf of Wall Street, The Departed, Goodfellas, and The Irishman.
Cool.
Order might change after tonight, but Goodfellas, King of Comedy, Taxi Driver is a big one I think we missed.
Taxi Driver's my 8, yeah.
It's the one I wanted to pick for 70s, but he picked Mean Street. So. And
then Silence and Color of Money are like they battle for the 5th spot.
5, The Aviator. 4, The Departed. 3, After Hours. 2, King of Comedy. 1, Goodfellas. So After Hours is the big one.
I think other notable ones that we didn't talk about, because I think it's important since this is just like a Scorsese episode in general. Like, I do think Raging Bull, up there, we've mentioned it. It's fantastic. I do think Shutter Island's great. Cape Fear, Boatman just mentioned After Hours, but I think we got to give some love to Casino. I do think Casino's great. I love Casino.
I do too.
I was going to bring up something about Casino when we talk about The Irishman, because I think they're very easy to compare movies.
So we'll get to that then. But those are the other big ones. But honestly, there's only 2 Scorsese movies I don't like. And that's Boxcar Bertha, New York, New York. I think those are bad movies. Everything else to me is a hit.
You like Age of Innocence. I'm proud of you.
I do.
I would say this too, since we're just kind of chatting in general. I think special recognition needs to be given to Hugo.
Absolutely.
Because here's the thing.
Makes no sense.
Scorsese gets so much hate for speaking the truth about MCU movies. And he's like, oh, he's the old curmudgeon. He's an old man. He's out of touch and everything. But you look at a movie, he's dudes in the 70s making a movie like Hugo, using like the most like up to date technology, 3D, IMAX, all that stuff. You know, with the Irishman, he's working with the streaming services. Dude's got no matter how old he is, guy's got his finger on the pulse. Like he's still with it. He's still keeping up. You know,
I think if you asked him, he would take back that comment just because I think it was taken out of like context.
It was taken a lot out of context.
It wasn't his. It's not his cinema. It's not what he goes for. Like, and that's not a shocker. And I mean, he's not going to.
It doesn't need to be a thing that everyone loses their mind about. I love the MCU unabashedly. Like literally, like even the movie that Nazario Montenegro, who's a fucking asshole, by the way, claims Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania is the worst movie ever made. Like, I still like it, and I still love The Irishman. So, like, you can like both things. It's okay.
Absolutely.
That being said, After Hours just came out on Criterion Collection 4K Blu-ray, and so they're doing the Lord's work. And also, I believe it was Arrow Video just released Hugo on 4K Blu-ray as well. So they're also doing the Lord's work. I will be watching both this week. Thank you, home physical
to help everybody.
Like that's one thing I want to shout out is probably no one has, at least living, has done more for the preservation of cinema.
Tarantino.
And no, I think Scorsese still takes lead because you look at like the world cinema that he is.
No, you're right. You're right.
Like, making sure actually is still available, like his world
you're right.
project, all that stuff. Like Tarantino is up there, sure, but I think in terms like Tarantino is doing a lot of talk, but I don't know if he's actually.
Yeah, that's Tarantino has the opportunity that Scorsese does this.
Yeah, I'm not criticizing Tarantino.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. You're right.
Scorsese is actively taking steps to ensure that certain movies have we will still be able to access them in 20, 30 years.
I don't know why I
wouldn't be able to do that.
Why would I question this man?
Okay. Also, Hugo is not 10/10, just to help everybody else out. Like that.
Although I will
struggle for me growing up.
I've been doing my Spielberg rewatch. I just rewatched Tintin. That movie's actually very good.
Oh yeah, well, maybe watch.
And Hugo also slaps. But Ben Kingsley is not in Hugo, but I will. Tintin not that bad actually. Okay.
I wish you'd never watch your Scorsese because your Hook thing is still the most annoying thing possible.
My Hook? Anyways. Oh, my Spielberg?
You gave it 2 stars. That makes no sense.
That movie sucks.
Like, I'm glad we spread everything out, but I'm a little sad because I maybe would have picked Hugo because now I just really want to rewatch Hugo after
just
talking
watch
about
it.
I am probably going to rewatch it.
It's so good.
Hey.
That is
who knows?
Again,
a year from now, we meet all up again. We talk another Scorsese for a new 5.
We're totally divulging, but we were. I didn't mention this before, but we were talking about Aviator with the love of cinema and old Hollywood. Look at Hugo. That movie is all about just the love of film. Like the dude is just he's like Boatman was talking with his with his preservation of cinema and everything. Like that whole movie is just. He loves cinema. It's so great. Okay, The Irishman.
I also will say is as Roundtable develops, YLS is off. I have a lot of people that want to do this. There are themed episodes that I do have planned and want to do. I think off the animation movies that are not from the big picture, big studios would be an interesting one, or kids movies from not big studios. I think would be interesting. Hugo being one of them, but we'll talk about that later.
The whole part of the round table was not to do certain topics.
I changed the okay. We're sitting here doing Scorsese.
I know.
Okay. I hear you paint houses. The Irishman.
I heard you paint houses. Oh.
I feel like this movie, I believe this movie is really special to me on multiple reasons, but I think it's really a special one is because this is the movie I think that me and Tim bonded over the most.
probably.
And I think that's what helped like our friendship like go to like a beyond level. Like we like a lot of similar movies. We enjoy certain movies like together, and we like talking films together. That's one of the best things about our friendship. But I remember when The Irishman coming out, it was almost an event for me and Tim. And like I remember talking, it was made for us, and like even if people hate it, like it was made for us. And we watched it together, which is also a great moment now, like watching together. But my feeling of this movie is I've loved The Departed ever since it came out, and this is no shot at it, but this is the movie that I have to tell myself weekly, it's not time to watch The Irishman again. It's the only like Kohoism that I feel like on an intense level that I don't have time to watch a 3-hour and like 26-minute movie or however long it is. Like I don't have the time to watch that, or I shouldn't watch that. And I do like watching it again last night. I've watched it twice in a week now. Because we were going to do this episode, we delayed it by a week or so, and so I rewatched it. And the smile this movie gives me is something that I chase in movies all the time. I chase like I'm watching a movie like that I love, and this is The Irishman for me. To get that out of the way, I don't give a shit what anybody says about the de-aging. I honestly, maybe in 30 years it doesn't look as great, but overall I don't give a shit. What they were able to achieve and what they were able to do in this movie, I think is mind-blowing. And that opening shot of this movie, I love. Because they're going through a nursing home, and when they see the back of De Niro while that music plays, and you just see a guy that's seen some shit. Like, there's always that one guy I remember going to see my grandfather in the nursing home, and there was that World War II vet that you just know has seen some fucking shit that you just want to sit there and talk to some stories about. That was Frank Sharon just sitting there, and you were like, and that music that he's able to tie into it is just so beautiful. But then when you go back and you start the journey with him, I think it's just an absolute fascinating movie. I hate the criticism from this movie that people say it takes 40 minutes, or 48 minutes to be exact, to get going. Because 48 minutes is when Pacino shows up for the very first time. Yeah, and it's like, Union guy. I hear you're one of us. And it's a nice thing, but overall it's not I think there's so many good moments before that. Like the driving,
my
the
favorite chunk of the movie is it says a lot about this movie when Pacino is my favorite performance in the movie, and my favorite part of the movie is before Pacino ever shows up. Yeah. Straight up. I love
when him and Russell are
hour.
What part? What's your favorite scene?
No, everything before Pacino shows up is my favorite part to live in the movie, because once Pacino shows up, it's when stuff really starts moving, and then it's like, oh, we're getting towards the end. And I know it's a 3.5-hour movie, and that's stupid of me to say, but it's how I feel. But Pacino is my favorite performance.
It's basically a guy that is not into this world, but like finds a way in and just jumps in and just is the most loyal guy in the room. Like, will do whatever he meets the guy and he's like talking about steaks, and then it goes into I'll give you one steak here, and then he ends up emptying the truck, and like me and Tim's like moment is like what the fuck is this? Like it's the highlight with that truck. You don't know you were driving an empty truck. Like, yeah, I didn't know at the time. Like, go ahead.
Sorry, we talked about bit performances earlier when we were talking about Aviator. This movie's nuts. There are people in this movie that's just Harvey Keitel. We go back to him; he's great. But the one that we were just talking about with like the steaks, my favorite person who's living today, Ray Romano. I wouldn't consider him a bit part. I was thinking more like, and now I can't think of the actor's name, Paxton and Ant-Man. Someone help me, please.
I'm trying to wait, who's
Bobby
Paxton?
Cannavale?
Yes, Bobby Cannavale.
Oh, Bobby Cannavale.
When he's sitting there eating the steak and he's like,
I'll take 6 more.
yeah, I'll take 6 more. Yeah. Okay. Like, he's fucking great. And then when the whole thing with like when he tells him to go get the guy to like bring him to the to come and talk to him or whatever, like that's why I like the back and forth a little bit more, I think, of the first 45 minutes with like looking at the beginning but looking at where we're going. I like the pacing of this. Like, one of the things that I hated the most around Oscar season of this year was people that were like, The Irishman nominated for editing. It was 3.5 hours long. They needed a better editor. I'm like, go fuck yourself. You don't know what that means. Because I think the editing and the story, the way they tell the story here, when bouncing back and forth between like him in the retirement home, him and Russell driving to the wedding, and him at the beginning, and the way it all kind of comes together is just fantastic. I have literally so many scenes I love from this movie. And I would like to tell a small quick story that like I got to see this in a theater. I don't know. I know. And it was like Tyler, Butler, Maggie, and I went and saw it. And props to Maggie, 3.5 hour long movie. She only got up to pee once. And we went and saw it at a dine-in theater. I had a bacon cheeseburger on a Hawaiian roll. Mwah, it was delicious. It was delicious. And it was also the first time I ever saw the of the Netflix logo in the theater, and it scared me a little bit. It was weird. It's not. I've seen it since, but all that to be said, I remember like sitting there and just like taking this movie in. And again, I said it with The Aviator, but there are moments when you're watching a movie where like you kind of realize like you're watching something like super special. The whole time I was watching this movie, loved it, but I never felt that like huge hit until literally like the credits rolled and like that ending shot of him just like sitting there in the room, and then it cuts and the credits start rolling. I was like, holy shit, I just watched something special. Fucking love this movie. Seriously, so many scenes I could talk about, but I'll let someone else talk.
What I will say before I'll pass it, just I promise. I think the first 45 minutes is interesting because it's him trying to figure out the world that he's in. He does the stake throb, he does all that stuff. He gets to go to jail, in the court talking about working man. He ends up bombing that laundromat and sits down with Cartel, and it should have just let the Jew mob have you. Like when he says that line to him, like, but you got a good friend here. You got Russell to cover you. Like that's such an interesting part because he doesn't know what world it is. He's thinking everybody he talks to is trustworthy. When Skinny Razor sends him to go pick up that guy, he goes, "Oh, well, he says his mother." He's like, he says his mother every week. Go get him. And he goes back to him. You make me look stupid, and like beats the hell out of him when he kicks the shit out of the guy for touching his daughter. Like in the thing, which is the worst scene in the movie because the de-aging looks the worst. It's the saddest point, but I like the moment of why he does it and his daughter. But I'm going to pass it to the two people that haven't talked. Go ahead.
See what names.
I wanted to talk about, like, Tim kind of alluded to it, but very similar to Goodfellas. There's like a clear midpoint in this movie. And again, I don't know if it's the actual midpoint in this movie, but there's a scene where, there's 3 main timelines of the movie, right? You have the first timeline, which is old De Niro in the old Frank Sheeran in the nursing home. That doesn't really enter this equation. But the other two, you have the kind of earliest layer, which is just the story of the actual movie, and then you have Russell and Frank going to the wedding, and the timelines where they both meet up and you slowly realize why they're there. And once the real timeline gets into the last timeline, like the last moment we get is of like the old timeline of like the past timeline is Russell saying it is what it is.
It's
And
my
it's
my
what it
second
is.
favorite scene.
And the Still of the Night, which is the song that has played multiple times in the movie, comes in. And then for the entire next rest of the movie, there is no music. It doesn't have the energy of like the cut.
Like an hour and 8 minutes. It's like an hour and 8 minutes left in the movie. There's no more sound.
There's no more music.
No
There is
more music.
the takes are much longer. They're much less flashy because now there's there is nothing to turn to. Frank is all alone. He's going to kill the person who meant the most to him. And like it's just inescapable. And I love it. And kind of a point that I've made before that kind of ties into this. Casino is a movie that is also kind of about the end of the gangster era. But you can tell it is not made by someone who is closer towards the end of their life. You can tell that this movie is made by someone who has lived the majority of their life. And I think that's why this movie is kind of the better version of Casino. Because while it still has the flashy Scorsese scenes that like Casino has, it has the level of maturity that I think Scorsese only could have made at this age.
I hate to do this, but like my baby is screaming upstairs, so I have a feeling I'm gonna have to leave soon. Unfortunately, so I just want to throw out there before Kirk says anything that like that I do think that like the whole like meeting up of the timelines thing, the moment that really like hits for me every time, and like the it is what it is moment that Boatman brought up with Russell, like and I'm pretty sure Frank is just eating some like fucking golden grams like in the middle of like a diner, like it's fucking awesome. But it's a scene like right before that is my favorite scene in the movie, is just like at Frank's like party, like his big like
well, that is it's what it is scene is Frank's party, isn't it?
Oh, I thought you were talking about where he says it later, where like
maybe I'm conflating two. I'm conflating two scenes.
Where I thought you were talking about where Russell basically says like you're gonna go kill him, and like basically says like this is
I think I am talking about that scene.
He's making the salad when he tells him that he's got to go. They're eating the cereal when he tells him he's the one that's going to kill him.
Yes, you're right. I'm conflating.
So, when they're at the party, and like I said earlier, Pacino is my favorite performance in the movie. But when Russell says to like De Niro, like go and talk to him, it's at this big party for Frank. Frank goes to talk to Jimmy, and Pacino says this like he says this line, he's like, they wouldn't fucking dare. Like it is like that moment where like Jimmy realizes just like really how deep shit is, but also like he, like I said earlier, or like we were talking about with Johnny Boy in Mean Streets, like he isn't gonna back down. Like he thinks he's too big. That whole sequence, that whole party, there's so much going on, and it's fucking awesome from beginning to end. Kirk, sorry, go ahead.
Well, can I just quick add one thing, Kirk? Is that okay? Or
yeah, good.
The quick thing I want to add, there's something very similar about Johnny Boy, Tommy DeVito, and Jimmy Hoffa, and they all kind of meet the same fate, which is interesting. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm going to back up a lot here because you guys covered a lot. First of all, you all were kind of referring to the title. I just love one of the biggest all-time Hollywood power moves. I love this. Like it's based on the book called "I Hear You Paint Houses," and the studio's like, "Yeah, we're going to change the name. We're called The Irishman." Scorsese's like, "Okay, sure." Movie starts, title card. I hear you paid houses. You never see The Irishman until the credits after it shows I heard you paid houses again. I just love that about it. But no, this is a great movie that it gets me like more every time I watch it. And if you're the kind of person who's like, I don't like Scorsese crime movies because they glorify mob, they glorify violence, this is the movie to watch, because this is the movie that comments on all of those films. I watched this back to back with, I watched Goodfellas, then this double featured them. And
me too.
yeah, because I think we'll talk about that because we talked, you and I talked about that off camera. But that watching this movie changed my perspective on Goodfellas, on Casino, on all those movies. There were scenes in Goodfellas that I laughed at, that after I watched The Irishman, I felt bad about laughing about, because that movie has, like I said, this Goodfellas or The Irishman starts where Casino ends, where Goodfellas ends, where you're down, the lowest point where it's all over, it's all, all the glory, all the flashiness is over, and you're just stuck with the consequences. That's where The Irishman starts. And it doesn't have those big like flash. There's no like wedding scene. There's no like party scene where like, oh, this life is great. Like every time you're watching this movie, you're like, this sucks. Like this is a bad life to live in. And I want to talk about Anna Paquin's character, because one of the all-time dumbest takes on movies, and the reason why just I hate talking movies in the 2020s in general, is the fact that, her character doesn't talk. And I guess if you're sitting there watching a movie with a checklist and you have a quota or whatever, I mean, that's going to be a problem for you. But thank God filmmakers like Martin Scorsese do this, who don't give a damn about your stupid list. They're just going to make a good movie. The fact that she exists in this movie, if you watch, the difference between this and all these other movies is Goodfellas, Casino, Mean Streets. Those all take place completely contained in that world, and you're only seeing that perspective. And when you get a character who's outside that world, they're played for laughs or seen as weak. You have like Henry's mother-in-law in Goodfellas. You have the banker that Pesci threatens in Casino. These are not seen as like real important people. You have Anna Paquin's character in this movie, and she's what makes the difference. The scene that Cody's talking about where he's stomping on, the grocer. Any other movie, that's like, oh yeah, go get him scene. But it's different because you're seeing it through her eyes. She is like the actual, like, real human moral center of this movie. And her existence is what makes those differences. And the fact that she doesn't talk, it's just her presence that does that. It would be so dumb if she like gave like a speech or something. And if she did, Frank wouldn't get it, because Frank is so emotionally stunted. He wouldn't understand. It would make her viewpoint less impactful to him.
The fact that she jumps in when she does to say like, did you call?
Yeah.
Like that's the best moment for her to jump in.
Because she
I
knows.
do have to stop though. I have to go and feed my child. I'm gonna cam off and mic off. I probably won't be back, but just in case there's a chance I might be, if you're still talking, I'll come back. But I probably won't be. But 5 stars, perfect movie. Mwah.
I think it's fascinating too, because it's basically the one person that doesn't agree with this lifestyle is her, from when she's a kid to when she's not ever roped into it. She doesn't care how much money you give, how many presents, how awesome she doesn't care. And her emotion, the little girl that plays the young version of her and thing, their acting with just face is some of the best in the entire film. The blank stares, when Anna Paquin's looking up at Russell and Frank when they're doing the it is what it is scene, like she knows like stuff. And like the scene where she does say and says like, you didn't call, I know how close you are with him. How, if you had nothing to do with this, you'd call immediately. Since you had something to do with this, fuck you. Like, you did this and you know you did this. I don't want to derail this, but like when we talked about, I think there's two scenes, but I think it's it is what it is scene is like the most powerful one and that people talk about from this film. But it shows Jimmy, it shows Hoffa basically, Hoffa believes he's on top of the world, but he's a minnow in the ocean. He doesn't realize how small he truly is and how much noise he's making when everybody else is like, listen. And that scene with him and Russell that sit there and have that conversation on the floor, and he's like, listen. He's like, I did this for 5 years. And he's like, I know you did, I know, but listen, you gotta stop. Like, and he doesn't listen to any reasoning. And when Russell sits down with Frank and goes, listen, it is what it is. He goes, well, it's Jimmy. He's the head of the union, blah, blah, blah. And when he leans in closely to him and he goes, if they can take out the president of the United States, the president of the union ain't nothing. And that's when like the reality of everything shrinks down. He's like, you ain't nothing, Hoffa. We will take you. And they dropped that note earlier in the film too, when Russell sits there and goes, talking to Frank about getting Kennedy elected, like thing, and goes, it just took a sit down and a conversation to get the old man where he is. And like Hoffa's so caught up in his own stuff that he's not able to play ball with everybody else, and that's what draws the divide. That's what does the ending of him at that point, which I think is fascinating, where they're able to unpack and go, because it's a long movie, but the overall story is what hooks you in. Like, because Hoffa's like, when we see Hoffa at first, like he's the king, like. Everybody knows solidarity, like he's screaming, like he's doing all the stuff, but how slowly he falls. I still do love that line when he's like, "What do you think about? Are you going to the Kennedy thing? I wasn't invited." Well, anybody can go. A million people are going to be there. Anything you got to say? Yeah, Bobby Kennedy is just a lawyer now. And then he looks up and sees that flag at half mast, and he's like, "Fuck that! It's going up." Like that's crazy. Like. That's an insane stuff that ends up happening throughout this movie that I just find absolutely just insane. Like, because I think it's because I love like American history and like knowing what ins and outs. So that's what draws me more into this movie than any, because it's real, like it's real stuff. Even though he does all his stuff about story, but when he dives into something, like he goes like all the way in and. All about this movie and everything about Frank and everybody that goes into it. I cut Kirk off, so go ahead.
No, that's a fine. No, I had pretty much concluded everything I want to say about that.
Okay.
Just real quick though about the and I think just a little bit of trivia. It's interesting that when Pesci sends De Niro to meet that guy about the trucks, it's basically like they're organizing
big ears
things. Yeah, no, not big ears, but the guy before him.
Okay, yeah.
That is the character that Joe Pesci plays at JFK. So it's like Pesci is
right.
that same character.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Let's talk about that for a second.
Yeah.
Pesci, the over the top, the loudmouth, the goofball, the thing, he turns into Paulie in this movie.
Yeah.
He's Paulie in this entire movie. And what a tonal switch. And honestly, I don't get into who should have won and whatnot, blah, 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 but they are giving, Pesci and him are giving performances like Pesci and Pacino are giving performances like no other. Like, that's crazy. Like, and that Pacino is the Pesci in this movie. The loudmouth, the over the top, the over the eccentric. It's just, this movie is like a present that you open and there's more stuff in it, but it's all good stuff. Like, it just keeps it's like, if you're a Scorsese fan, this is like, I feel like this is like a moment in like a Marvel or a Star Wars movie that people read in comics or what. I'm like, it's on screen. Like, this is for me, like, the more and more we get into it, like, you bring Keitel back, you bring Pacino for the first time in this. Like, there are stuff that you just keep unpacking that I think is just fascinating with it. But we were talking about Russell as basically switching completely on his career. So go ahead if you got.
Well, what I think is really interesting to kind of compare Pacino and Pesci is, like, I think it's impossible to actually compare the performances because it's basically just what type of acting do you think is better? do you think that like the flashy creating this big character and kind of having the outward acting moments, or do you kind of like your acting kind of being in the very subtle movements? And I think both are great acting and both are necessary, and both are showcased here by Pesci and Pacino.
Right.
And
Go ahead.
I
No.
think too, if we're talking about performance, I think we talk a little bit about De Niro, because it's
Yeah.
really easy on the surface to look at this as just like a stereotypical like mumbly De Niro performance that like people parody or whatever. But I think he does such a great job of playing a guy with a diminished capacity for emotion. Like when he feels upset, you almost get the sense like he's not upset about the thing itself. He's more upset that he knows he should feel worse about it and he doesn't. And there's even that scene at the end with the priest where he's like, "Well, do you feel sorry?" He's like, "Oh, not really. Like, what about the? I didn't know the families, but is it maybe like wanting to feel sorry, the same as feeling sorry? It's like he doesn't have that capacity. And even like when he's telling the story, like there's so many times when like he's just so disinterested in it. Like he's almost like boring himself. There's that one point, I forget where it is, but he's talking about somebody getting killed or something. It's a pretty major moment in the story. He's like, and he's telling the story, and then he just trails off, and he's like, whatever, like he just over it. You know what I mean? And I think he just plays for a character. He brings so much depth to a character that doesn't have a lot of depth. I think he's really good at that.
I think it's also really like at the end when he's near the end, which is such a like this man took out basically his best friend in the movie. Like him and Russell overall, but like him and Pacino were thick as thieves together. He took him out and lost everything. He killed one guy at the end and lost everybody in his life. And no one, the sad thing, I do love the little comedic line. He gets in there, it's like, your lawyer, who took him out? What? He died, like cancer. Like, oh, like, he thought somebody got to him at the end. When we were talking about like people that act above their, like punch above their weight, and I'm not saying, again, this is not a shot at him as an actor, but I am not going to go this entire podcast without talking about Stephen Graham as Tony Pro.
Oh my God, so good.
I mean, anybody that's talked to me knows how much I love the scene. Like, I absolutely love the scene. The two scenes with Tony Pro is basically when he sits there and he's like talking to Pacino and eating the ice cream. And he's like, my pension. He's like, can't do anything for you. What do you mean? Well, I did fraud. You did. What did he get for him? What did he go in for? He
like threatened some violence.
He threatened. He goes, the difference is you threatened somebody. That's the difference. I didn't fraud.
Extortion.
Yeah.
Fraud, extortion. Can't do nothing for. What do you mean? You people. He's like, what? What do you mean by you people? And then they end up fighting him and saying, I love the scene. If you haven't heard them talk about it, is Scorsese and Pacino talk about this moment of Tony Pro. And when he does the scene with him at the thing, and it's not in the script, it's not practice or whatever, but when he knocks the tray away from him, they cut as soon as the tray hit. And Pacino looks at him and goes, Marty, you see that? He scared me. He scared me. This kid's got something. It's just one of those funny scenes. But when the scene flips and he has to get Tony Pro on his side, and how Jimmy Hoffa just doesn't fucking understand the politics of the world that he's in. And he sits there and he shows up in shorts and stuff like that. And he's like, you show like that up in a meeting? He's like, it's Florida. You show up that, and they go back. They do the back and forth. He's like, wait, 15 minutes, 10 minutes. I do that for traffic. Like they just don't ever get it. And then he's like, oh, but when he looks at him and goes, yeah, I'll apologize when I do kidnap your granddaughter and cut out her guts and send it to you. And they attack each other. It's an absolutely insane scene between those two, which is arguably my favorite scene in the entire movie because it's so, like, even Frank sitting across the room is like, dude, you just have to agree with whatever he says at this moment, and you get what you want back. He just doesn't get it, and he won't get it, and it's crazy. It's a crazy complex.
My favorite, like, little moment of the movie is when Tony Pro's getting arrested at the country club, and they're putting the cuffs on him. He gets up.
Does the run.
He like does all the thing like he's gonna fake, and he turns around and laughs at the cops. That's so great.
Yeah, because it's the one is everybody in the world knows how to play the politics, but Jimmy, and when Russell, and this is jumping now back, but when Russell sits there and talks to him and says, "Go talk to him," and he sits there and has one more conversation, they wouldn't dare. Yeah, fucker, they would, and they're going to kill you, and it's going to be me. Plus, Scorsese spoils this movie within the first 10 seconds of the movie when he shoots Hoffa. Like, they show shooting Hoffa right at the start of the whole thing. Like, again, if you don't know that Hoffa died, whatever. But it's a fascinating thing. I do love the car scene too with the truck when he's like, "What kind of fish? What do you mean you don't know what fish you brought? What you trying? Who? Like he just doesn't let it go." There is one the tiniest gripe that I have in this movie is when they pop up the shots of what happened to the people. Like they had 3 bullets to the face, blah blah. But some of those deaths play out in the movie. Like, why was that the choice?
I think
I kind of like that every character we are introduced to, we are introduced that they're gone. Like, I just kind of love, because it feeds into this idea that Frank is all alone, that he's the only one left.
Then that makes me like it a little bit more.
I think it also plays into what I was saying, how it's like just completely devoid of glorifying the lifestyle. It's like as soon as you meet somebody, you're introduced to them and also the violent end they meet. Like the end, like at the beginning of that character, you also get their ending. So there's no time of
there's no escape.
Yeah.
There's no escape.
Yeah. And everybody, by the time he's sitting there, everyone's gone.
Mm-hmm.
Like everyone is gone, and I think that's such an powerful. That makes more sense.
I want to bring in 2 Scorsese movie connections, like connections to other Scorsese movies. One, this is sort of a connection, but not really. Michael Francese is this guy who's like a former gangster, and now he was on a variety video where he broke down different gangster movies. But Mikey Francese is in Goodfellas, not the person, but the character is portrayed as when they're listing off all the people from Frankie 2 Times and all them, he's one of the people mentioned. But it's interesting, he claims that this entire story is BS and that everything Frank Sheeran says is made up. So that's kind of interesting. The other thing I love that it's Rickles doing the stand-up. Yeah. I love that it's that Don Rickles is the one doing the stand-up at one of the scenes. And I think even Pacino says, "Come on, let's watch Rickles." Or somebody says, "Just watch Rickles, enjoy it." I love that. Because of course Rickles in Casino, who's really another great taking somebody kind of wild and getting a really good understated performance out of them, but then also some of the greatest outtakes of all time.
Oh yeah. Well, that's when the guy says it. He goes, "What? Rickles can make the jokes, but I can't." That's basically what it is. Anything else on Irishman before we call it? Again, this is a man we love, we adore. I think a lot of us will be very heartbroken when that day comes.
Don't even talk like that.
No.
Don't even talk.
I know,
but be 500 years old. Shut your mouth.
Listen, I'm just saying.
He's gonna live forever.
At the end of the day,
we're going to take Del Toro up on his offer. Start sucking those years out.
By the way, all I'm saying is Father Time is undefeated. But Barr just give me his ratings. Goodfellas 4 stars. I think it's great, but for some reason it doesn't hit me the way that it does others.
What the fuck?
It's the third act. I think it's the third act. It starts to lose me, Pesci.
You child.
So speaking of the first one, and he goes, Irishman 4.5 stars is the one that does it for me. I think the Pesci should have won Best Supporting Actor that year. The more I see it, Stephen Graham is anything more than I like him as an actor. The meeting in Miami scene is so funny, great setting. Everybody else is I'm at 5 stars. It's my favorite. It's now my favorite movie of all time. It's number 1. It passed Departed. It's honestly 3 Scorsese sit atop, and I don't care, and I'm unabashed, and I do not give a shit. It is Goodfellas. It's Irishman, Goodfellas, and The Departed in lockstep, and I'm fine with that. He makes the movies for me. Bowman.
It is it is 5 stars for me, and I'm gonna make an adjustment. This is above The Aviator. This is number 5 on my Scorsese ranking.
Bless you, child.
Yeah, and I
Honestly,
realized-
it always was. I just forgot that it was, and I was doing them off the top of my head. Like on my top 100, this is like I have. So I think Scorsese has more movies on my top 100 than any other director because he has.
He definitely has enough for me too. Kirk.
Yeah, I realized I gave that top 5, but I realized reading an old list, and I realized just from rating these movies that it's going to completely change. But this is up to 4.5 for me.
Oh, it's getting there. We're getting closer. Okay, I want to thank everybody that was on tonight. Again, I could literally do the same panel and pick 5 different ones and have the same conversations. He is a director that is absolutely a masterclass. He's inspired so many people, and he has made so many actors better because of working with him. So, thank you all for being on. We will be back. Hopefully go see his movie in the theaters. Who cares if it's 3 hours and whatever minutes? Enjoy it. I wish it was 7. Thank you all. Bye-bye.